Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to just a few months ago, the 94th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 2021. 12 years after her last film, Bright Star, Jane Campion finally returned to direct another film, adapting the Thomas Savage novel The Power of the Dog into a film of the same name. The film premiered at the Venice Film Festival, where Campion won the Silver Lion Award for Best Direction. This would be one of many director prizes won by Campion this award season, while her film and stars Benedict Cumberbatch and Cody Smith-McPhee also took home a slew of critics' awards. The film went on to earn 12 Oscar nominations, the most of any film that year, and was thought to be the frontrunner for Best Picture. But while Jane Campion won Best Director, becoming the third woman in history to do so, that would be the only prize it won that night, and it was the Sundance darling CODA that ultimately won Best Picture in the end. So how did The Power of the Dog come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Power of the Dog. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here with my annual Best Picture breakdown. We are going back to basics today, covering a Best Picture race and talking about the runner-up and so much more. So much to get to today, of course, because we'll be discussing this past year's race, where I picked The Power of the Dog as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to CODA. And my guest today is truly, I would say, one of the rising stars of Oscar prognosticating. She's been doing it for a few years now, to be fair, but I feel like the profile is rising a little bit over the past year or so. That's just my observation. But you've heard her on the Best Actress series, of course, last year, talking about 1937. And she's also been on a bonus episode in the past. And now she's back to help me break down this very fascinating race. Co-host of the Oscar Wilde podcast, and also now a member of the Awards Watch team. Please welcome back to the show, Sophia Ciminello.
Hi, Kevin. That was so nice. I'm so excited to be back. I feel like you always have me on for really tough years. So I think in the future, we need a good one. We need a fun one. But
that's fair.
You know, I have to tell you, when CODA won Best Picture, I wanted nothing more than to join you on this episode. For what kind of fan of The Power of the Dog would I be if I didn't protect my mother, Jane Campion, if I did not save her from the discourse?
Mother. Yes.
It's my little Cody Smith-McPhee voiceover wink.
This is good. This is very good. Also, I will just note that when she said at the Oscars,
"Thank you, Kevin, that was very dramatic,"
I took that personally. So
as you should.
Yes. All right. So let's just jump right in. I mean, I will just, as a prelude, say that as of this recording, we are about 3 months off of the ceremony. I think the discourse has moved on to other things. There's also just a lot going on in the world at the moment, so bigger, more important matters to be discussed. But I do think that this will be an interesting discussion to just sort of contextualize how this race happened, and just now that the dust has settled, maybe, I don't know how emotions will be at this point. We were both certainly passionate about this race, so we'll see how it goes now that we've been out of that for a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like it's the proper amount of time to be away from it. You know, I swore I would never talk about it again, but this feels like the proper opportunity. I feel like you were my go-to person to sort of grieve with when the Oscars ended, and just, you know, champion this movie for what it was, which is a masterpiece. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Champion this Campion.
Yes.
All right. So let's just jump right into it. Here we go. All right. So The Power of the Dog. It is a psychological Western drama set in the 1920s, and it centers on a rancher named Phil Burbank who owns a successful ranch in Montana with his brother George. And George ends up meeting this single mother, Rose, who he falls in love with, and they get married, and she goes to live with them, as well as her teenage son, Peter. And we see how Peter is a sensitive young man who wants to be a doctor, and he just has to deal with Phil and all of his brutality, just constantly bullying him and torturing his mother, until the tables are turned and Peter decides, maybe I'll get some revenge. So the film was written and directed by Jane Campion, adapting the book of the same name by Thomas Savage, and it stars Benedict Cumberbatch as Phil, Cody Smith-McPhee as Peter, Jesse Plemons as George, and Kirsten Dunst as Rose. And The Power of the Dog was a Netflix release, so there's nothing really to report as far as box office, but apparently it was a popular release. It was in the top 10. I don't even really know how to measure success when it comes to Netflix, but all signs point to it being a hit for them, at least. But it was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, leading all films of 2021. But it only walked away with one Oscar, and that Oscar was not Best Picture, although that would have been fun if that was the case. So, Sophia, let's just jump right into it. I don't know how many times you've seen this movie, and I don't know what number this time was for you, if you lost count. Just tell me about your relationship with this movie and why it kind of connected with you.
Yeah, so this time was number 6. I had watched it so many times because my relationship with this movie, it started at New York Film Festival, and this movie actually wasn't that high on my list of most anticipated movies of the year. I definitely respected Jane Campion, but I had only seen Bright Star and The Piano before going into this movie. And I really wasn't quite sure how to feel about Benedict Cumberbatch in a Western. He was not really one of my actors. We can get to maybe how that changed with this movie. But man, from the moment that Johnny Greenwood score starts and we get that voiceover from Peter, I was just completely transfixed. I really just couldn't believe what was happening. All of these beautiful shots, the parallel images. It felt like this work of an accomplished master. And when I finished the movie, I actually had trouble getting up out of my seat. Like, I just was sitting there watching the credits, listening to that Greenwood score continue. And then I left the theater. I called my mom while I was pacing outside of Lincoln Center, and I told her, I think I just saw the best movie I'm going to see this year. And I was right. It was the best movie that I saw that year, and I saw it early October. I kept, the beauty of having it on Netflix actually was that I got to keep watching it. I got to go back to it after I read the book. I actually saw this movie before I read the book, so I was able to sort of have this continued relationship with it, show it to my family, show it to my friends, and yeah, I just love it so much. And I really never anticipated it to be this huge Oscar juggernaut when I first saw it. I was just like, this is going to be my little movie. Usually the movies that I like don't win everything, with the exception of Nomadland the year before, but I never anticipated what was ahead with it and was so excited when it maxed out with nominations and then was promptly let down, of course. So that's my relationship to it. I love it deeply.
Wow. Well, this is my third time watching The Power of the Dog, so not quite as many times, but still, I will just say, just right at the top, this was also my favorite movie of 2021. It was just very satisfying when I first watched it because I guess it was December by that point. I hadn't seen it in a festival or anything, but I just watched it on Netflix like most of America. And by that point, I hadn't really seen a lot of films that connected with me on like a deeper level from last year for whatever reason. And then when this came around, I was like, here we go, like finally some good food.
Yeah.
And I just found it to be such a enriching experience, and I think it's really just one of those films that is so rewarding on a rewatch, just because you see these new layers. You can just appreciate all of the detail that Jane Campion just put into crafting this story and pacing it very deliberately to just get like the maximum payoff at the end. And I have to say that on this particular rewatch, I really just found myself still appreciating the story, obviously, but more so looking at just the craft and just like the shot compositions and the editing choices and Johnny Greenwood's amazing score, and just, I guess, just watching how much control that she has over this material. And you could see why that she was attracted to this story, because I think it shares a bit of commonality with a lot of her other films. Even though this is her first time centering a man, it's still all about like these complicated power dynamics and, you know, brutality and like society expectations and all this wonderful juicy stuff, and of course putting her own spin on it in her own very quirky Jane Campion way, like she does with, you know, she's like The Piano and Portrait of a Lady, Bright Star. These are movies that are in the period genre but are very much unmistakably Jane Campion. And here it's like we have a western but there's really so much going on, you know, beneath that, just the psychological dynamic that I guess it's just a movie that for me I love because it rewards you for you giving it your attention, basically. And I find that a lot of movies that come out these days are not quite hoping for that, or they don't expect that of the audience. Whereas this one, I feel like it's not going for like cheap thrills or like just trying to be like a fun Western revenge tale. Like it's striving for something more, which I appreciate.
Exactly. And I actually think that the Western specifically is a perfect genre for Campion, because Westerns really allow filmmakers to hold up a magnifying glass to specific societal issues, to internal issues that the characters may be facing. And sometimes, you know, people criticize Westerns for being too masculine, for being too obvious in their themes, in their symbols, and their framing. And Campion is so well equipped to play in that space. She's an incredibly tactile filmmaker. When I watch a Jane Campion film, I love that I can almost feel like I'm touching the objects that the characters are touching, the way that she frames them. And I think that she, because of the way that she shoots her films and the control that she has with this Western genre, she's able to deconstruct so many tropes and themes that we're really familiar with. So while some people may look at a particular shot and say, wow, Jane Campion, you're being really obvious there. Like, she's playing in that space. She's playing in the Western genre. And I feel like, yes, she's so used to working with women, telling women's stories, but this is, if you're telling a story about a man, like, this is the perfect place for her to play.
Absolutely. And we don't have a lot of the classic Western-y tropes in the sense that, like, we don't have, like, gunfights, and it's not like this war of cowboys and Indians, like that classic dynamic. And it's not even really a violent movie. But yeah, this really is like a deconstruction of a Western, as cliche as that is said to be these days in terms of deconstructing a genre. But really with sort of playing with how Phil wants to just exemplify like this big, tough leader of the West. And he clearly idolizes Bronco Henry and just that generation. And I feel like he sees that tradition sort of slipping away, and it's scaring him. And it makes you wonder if the reason that he's scared is because, you know, he's grown up a certain way. He's just used to that. He's conducted his life in that way. And now he's seeing things change. And there's this sort of, I guess, infusion of the more feminine qualities and sensitive qualities, and something like Peter and having Rose around is something that he's not really used to. And he just doesn't really know it doesn't really compute. But then I feel like there's also part of him that's maybe is wishing that he could have that level of confidence that Peter has when he's like, you know, walking very sassy along the way and everyone's like catcalling Peter, but he's still just like owning himself, you know?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a combination of both things. I think we have to, because of the parallel shots and parallel images that Campion gives us, she shows similarities between Phil and Peter. And I think we have to think back about Phil's background. So, he graduated Phi Beta Kappa at Yale. He was a classics major. So you have to assume, right, that there was this life before the ranch, before the Phil that we know now, where he probably was more similar to Peter. And so for Phil, that comes with, I think, a fear that Peter knows him. Peter knows his secret. But also it's a deeper sadness in that Peter has this, like you said, confidence maybe that he never could have had, because I think I always interpreted it as, Phil came back to the ranch and he was ready to shed every bit of intellectualism that he gained when he was at university. And I think Jane Campion goes even deeper there, because this idea of anti-intellectualism, it's baked into American culture, and the cowboy is like the pinnacle of that. And it's funny too that it was sort of baked into the discourse of the naysayers of this film as well, but we can get to that later.
You could say Sam Elliott. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of sadness there with Phil, and we can talk about like the shot of the dog in the mountain, thinking about that of the only people who can see this dog that's in the mountain are Bronco Henry, who, of course, I love that we never see. I just watched A Letter to Three Wives, and Addie Ross, right? She like sort of hangs over that movie. And Rebecca, of course, that was the first comparison I made here when I saw this movie. I love that Bronco Henry isn't visible. We only really know about him through mythology, which is also very American, very Western, which I love. But of course, the only people, again, who can see the dog are Bronco Henry, Phil, and Peter. And there is a certain sadness there where Campion is saying, this movie's daring you to see what's right in front of you the whole time. I missed a lot of things when I first saw it. It sort of hit me like a ton of bricks when it ended. But there's the sadness there is that there's a line where one of the other cowboys says to Phil, there's got to be something there. And Benedict Cumberbatch delivers this line perfectly. And he has this like sort of clipped delivery when he says, not if you can't see it, there ain't. And that is not only showing, right, that the dog is there, but it's like you can almost hear him saying, there's got to be something there between those two guys. And Phil is like, nope, not if you can't see it. Not if I hide it. Not if I cake myself in mud. You can't see it.
Yeah. Well, I also definitely interpret just the whole dog visual as, very much like gay coding, in the sense of like, you share a certain thing, like friend of Dorothy, like that sort of classic sort of thing. Like you can only see things a certain way. And that is, of course, when we get the turn with Phil realizing like, I know what you are in a sense. But I do think I think a fun way of diving into this might actually be to just talk about each of the four characters and the specific performances here, because that's something that I also really was watching on this rewatch, is just how all four of them are so perfect for these specific parts. And I think it's a crime that none of them actually won an Oscar, or like any of the precursors, although Benedict did win, and Cody a fair share of critics awards. Major awards, not so much. But we can definitely dive more into Benedict Cumberbatch. You did invite me on Oscar Wilde earlier this year, where we talked about the lead acting performances, and we got to talk about this performance. And I think we'd also like share that commonality that I was never really like, not that I wasn't a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch, but I just wasn't really like fully wowed by him in the past. And watching him here, it was like just the level of intensity that he brings to it. Even the accent work is pretty good, I would say, which I did not expect going into this movie, I will fully admit. But there's just, even outside of just the boisterousness of that performance, I think it's the quiet moments where he's not projecting and sort of performing masculinity that is really where I was most impressed by him. And really you see like that deep self-loathing that's going on. Just in the way he looks when he's not talking. There's just like those quiet moments. I was like, okay, Benedict, you're really winning me over here, because you can really feel like the pain. Like, I understand that pain. So yeah, it really affected me.
Me too. And, I actually think of Adam Driver in Annette, weirdly. Stay with me here. I feel like Leos Carax is one of the only directors who I've seen who knew what to do with Adam Driver's presence. I feel like a lot of other directors just like didn't know what to do with him because he's sort of strange and he doesn't really look like anyone else. And I feel like with Benedict Cumberbatch, it was a similar problem where I had seen him in things like Sherlock and very English things like The Imitation Game, seen him fumble through accent work in The Mauritanian, which scared me for this movie. And I think Jane Campion knew like the power in his weirdness. She knew that he was perfect for this type of character. He has that very intellectual look to him. Like, he looks like he could have gone to boarding school, gone to Yale, all of that, but he just doesn't look like he fits in there. He looks like he's trying too hard. Right. And that's the character. And I completely agree with you that the quiet moments are what I like most. One of my favorite shots of the entire year, and one of my favorite things I saw an actor do all year, is when Phil is laying in the grass and he takes Bronco Henry's handkerchief and starts draping it over his face. It's just this like beautiful, tragic moment, and it's almost like this shroud covering him. And I feel like Benedict's acting in those moments like show that Jane Campion understands him as an actor, and he was sort of allowed to play at a new space. And I also agree with you on the accent, and I will say that I noticed some inconsistencies in it, or certain moments where I felt like he was overperforming. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, okay, that's part of the way that this character is supposed to sound. He probably, when he went away to college, knew he had to squash that Montana accent hard. Like, he had to get rid of it to fit in. And his life is all about fitting in or performing. So what's going to happen when he tries to come back? He's going to over exaggerate and perform that hyper masculine Montana rancher accent. I think the exaggeration's part of his character, and I think you hear it most when he's yelling, when he's in those extreme moments, when he's screaming at George. That's when you hear those like weird O's and certain sounds that don't fit. I think that's why he's doing it, and I think it's if that's what he's doing, I think it's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, I have to imagine that is intentional. Or at least I hope that it is. But yeah, I mean, even what I also took note of was just the character introductions for each of them. And I do think that with him, just the way that he's just sort of marching through the field into the house, basically like hip first, like he's really just protruding his way through, is very performative feeling. And I think that's a perfect introduction for him. And we can definitely transition here into Cody, because I remember hearing a lot of interesting takes on this performance over the course of the season, where some people were impressed with him. Certainly a lot of critics were, based on all the critics awards he won. Other people didn't really see much of anything there, from what I understand. I guess you could compare it to like seeing the dog on the mountain. Or you either see it or you don't, right? Personally, I guess unsettled would be the word I would use by this performance, especially because he's very methodical and patient, and he'll obviously make a very wonderful surgeon one day. But I think maybe underwhelming for some people because he doesn't ever raise his voice. There's something very distant about him intentionally. But I do think, a lot like with Benedict, the wheels are definitely turning in his head, and you can see just in how Phil is treating Peter in especially the first half of the film. You just see how much he's internalizing what's happening there. But it's like you sense there's definitely something going on with Peter. But I love the fact that even though we get that one little voiceover at the beginning, I feel like we never fully are in his perspective, you know, in a sense that like you want to know what he's thinking. I feel like in a simpler version of this story, he would be like the protagonist, and he would be like, this is the story of how I got revenge on, you know, this guy who's tormenting my mother. But instead it's kept, I think, purposely distant in a way that I just found very interesting, in the same way that Cody was bringing something very cold to that performance, but not in a way that I found him like creepy necessarily. He's not like a serial killer, I don't think. It's just this one particular situation that he's been caught up in. This is what he felt like he's had to do. And I feel like I don't fully understand why certain people felt like there wasn't a lot there. Like, I feel like in some sense, I think the film is working really well in concert with his performance to give you such an interesting character there. But I think part of it is also what he's bringing to it. It's just like this very odd energy that really works for the character.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Ari Wegner, who should have been our cinematography winner, she does something that Gordon Willis does in The Godfather with the Michael Corleone character, where she shoots and lights Cody in very bright light until we can't really trust him anymore. Then she starts, he moves into darker spaces, like in the barn, and that's pretty scary. Like that, he is supposed to disarm you a little bit, but I feel like in a similar way to Benedict Cumberbatch here, Cody Smith-McPhee doesn't really look like he belongs here either. I had never seen this individual before I saw this movie, or at least if I had, I didn't recognize him.
You said, I don't know.
Yeah,
this
I was
man.
like, I don't know him. He's new to me. And I thought he was wonderful. I thought he was perfect for this sensitive, feeble character who you have to believe at some point in the movie has what it takes to come into his own. And he's able to achieve that. The vitriol I saw online towards his performance was honestly bizarre to me. I really didn't get it. He seems like a very nice person, and this performance fits in perfectly, like you said, with the movie. And I didn't see where he was going. And I mean, it worked on me. And I learned in a Q&A with Kirsten Dunst and Cody Smith-McPhee, what I thought was really, really neat, and I'm sure you know this too, is that they had a secret in filming, which is that Peter killed his father. It wasn't suicide. And I think when you watch it again, knowing that, you can sort of see like some evil behind his eyes, maybe, that this is something that he was able to do. And I caught this time when I was watching it, when, you know, because he is a true supporting performer. There's actually, kind of like you mentioned, we're never really in his point of view. There's a good chunk of the movie where he's not in it at all. He's away at school, but we get this shot of his books in the back of the car, and Rose says to him, "Why don't you leave your medical books here for the summer?" And he says, "I thought about it, but you know they were Dad's." And when you hear that, it's like, ooh, maybe he's ready to kill again.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very good detail. Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely understand that he loves his mother very much, more than anything else in the world.
Little Norman Bates.
Little baby Norman Bates in the making here. But I don't think he would ever do anything too bad to his mother.
No, I agree.
But actually, a random comparison that came to me, I remember on that Oscar Wilde episode, I had mentioned that Benedict felt a little bit like Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. Not entirely, but just the sense of just like really dominating that film. I also do think that if we look at the other male acting winner from that year, Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men. Again, stay with me here.
We're just making the comparisons today. It's fine.
Yeah. I think there are some similarities with what Cody Smith-McPhee is sort of bringing to the role, where I don't know if I would classify him as a villain. You know, he's not going around killing everyone he meets. But I think it's clear by the end of the movie that Peter feels justified in what he did. I don't think he'll be haunted by what he did as the years go on. I don't know if he'll even tell anybody about it. And there's something a little bit of Anton Chigurh there, where like he has his own just methodical way of killing people and not really showing remorse. And he just kind of has his own reasoning for doing things. And yes, I mean, there's big differences there. But I think just the way that also they function in these movies, it's like that sort of unknowable factor. And just the way that he doesn't really try to fit into normal society. He just kind of does his own thing. And there is like a confidence there that's interesting, but it's also kind of unnerving at the same time. Also, I think there's like these tiny moments of humor. Like for me, when Phil says that he's making the rope for Peter before he goes back to school, and then Peter's just like, "It won't be long now, Phil," and he gives him like a little smirk. I just find him so fascinating to watch, and I really do think it's a great example of the material really lending itself to the performance and the film really influencing how you feel about him. So yeah, I was a huge fan of this performance.
I was too. I really love this performance, and I actually like that comparison because I do think there's also a blankness to both characters. Like sometimes when you just see them staring off into the distance, you're like, oh, you have that serial killer look to you. Okay, I'm gonna stay away from you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he does it very well. Very well, Cody Smith-McPhee. I don't know if he'll be typecast after this, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah. Have you seen Elvis yet?
No, I have not.
We'll skip over that. He's in Elvis, but we can talk about that another time.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Kirsten Dunst. And I've actually had quite an evolution with this performance from the first watch to then these rewatches, where I thought she was great from my first watch and everything, and obviously the most sympathetic character in the film, so very easy to root for her and be on her side and everything. My thing, though, was that I feel like we've seen characters like this before. Just the woman who's dealing with this terrible man in her life. She's a wife, she's a mother, you know, she turns to drinking to sort of numb the pain. I think we've seen characters like that quite a bit. In fact, I've encountered quite a few on my Best Actress series, and will definitely be doing many more in the years to come.
I was like, do you miss your Best Actress series? Is
exactly,
that what's happening here?
Yeah. But I think because it felt a little bit more tropey, I feel like part of that maybe bled into how I felt about Kirsten and the performance itself, which again I thought was very good, but I could have seen other actresses playing the part, like Elizabeth Moss, who was originally supposed to be in this role, but she had to back out. Definitely could have pictured Michelle Williams doing something like this, but I feel like once I rewatched the film a few times, it clicked into place for me that she herself was bringing something unique to the role. And I connected it to Ingrid Bergman in Gaslight, actually, in one of my reviews, which is like, she's that character who could have had a very nice, normal, boring, happy life. And she could just be surrounded by great friends and throw these parties and play piano and be very comfortable with her existence. But she is being stifled by this one very toxic force in her life that is just making her spiral into herself, basically. You see that her personality, before she gets to the ranch, I feel like you see, even though she's been through a lot, that she is a bright spirit and she connects with George in this cute way. And obviously later on when we see her getting drunk and she's like spilling the sugar all over the place and laughing to herself, we're seeing little bits of who she is. But it's like whenever Phil is around, it's really like walking on eggshells. And I think she does take a part that could be pretty standard, like I was saying, and just gives her a lot of character And just, I mean, you have to remember that she is a widow. You know, she's had to grieve for her husband already. And here's this opportunity for her to, you know, have this life with George and live on a ranch and sort of be happy. And then having to deal with this very negative force here is just sending her over the edge. And it's just, for me, it's one of those performances actually where you really feel for the actor having to go through it, because I don't imagine it was easy for her. Actually, on a lot of levels, it probably was not easy. But.
Yeah. I think this is the type of role that actors, when they talk about like places they don't want to go back to or roles they don't want to think about, like this is a key example of a role like that. I actually had a really similar experience when I first watched this. It was all Benedict and Cody for me. I was like, I mean, obviously I love Kiki, love Kirsten Dunst, and was rooting for her to get her first nomination. But her performance didn't stand out to me, and I think it's, you know, I didn't see what was right in front of me. I think that she actually, to use another, you said Ingrid Bergman, to use another example from that time, I thought about Joan Fontaine and Rebecca. I love stories about women who are just like put in environments where they're fish out of water and they're just seemingly weak and need to find inner strength, but because of, you know, another person there or another dominant force, they can't get there. It's heartbreaking, but it really works in this film. And I think Kirsten, what she does, you know, when I saw it again, it's like, it seems like the type of role we know all too well in supporting actress. You have this like capable mom who's like doing the dishes and making dinner and wants to be helpful and has a kid. Like we know this as people who look back at the Oscars, but
suffering wife.
Yeah. But I think that Dunst has really tremendous emotional range, and part of it too is that she dreamed of working with Jane Campion since she was a really young actress. And I feel like they both, in addition to just having the same birthday, being similar people, they really understood each other. And I think they get to that deeper pain of the Rose character. And man, you really feel it when Kirsten Dunst is playing the piano and Benedict Cumberbatch is on those stairs taunting her. You have that sick feeling. They're so good in those scenes. And when you see that shot of her just still sitting at the table when the governor and his wife have gotten up from that dinner and George has, and you're just like, ugh, you just feel for her. So she's so good in this. I loved her.
I physically feel ill when I watch her, which sounds bad, but like it's very much part of what she needs to bring to the role. Like she physically looks ill, and I also feel ill watching her go through it.
Yeah. And when she's just holding that tray of drinks again, it's like she lives on this ranch now. She's married to George, but there she is again, almost like this just servant type of figure holding the drinks for them. It's just, wow. Yeah.
Her other half, of course, we have Jesse Plemons as George, who also is having to sort of walk on eggshells, because he grew up with this brother, and I don't know what their dynamic really was leading up to when we first meet them, but I don't feel like it was that different. I don't think he changed that much, but I thought this was absolutely perfect casting because Jesse Plemons is just so good at this type of humble, decent character, Midwestern, well-mannered, maybe a little socially awkward, but in an endearing way, sometimes in a creepy way, other times. In this case, I think very endearing. And yeah, all of those things really just suit this character who is so used to being tormented by his brother, like calling him fatso and always just having to dominate everything. And it's like every time he suggests anything to Phil, it's like always with that hesitation. Obviously his scene when he gets married to Rose and he says that it's just nice to not be alone is so beautiful and true, because the way he expresses that is so earnest, because that's probably how he feels even though he's been with his brother for all these years. It's like having to deal with someone like that can make you feel even more isolated than if you actually were alone, you know? So yeah, I love that scene, and it's also one of the only times in the film that we really see like a more positive expression of anything, really, of love and just like vulnerability, and then to have that also reciprocated back from her. It's, yeah, it definitely stands out in a film that is decidedly minor key, I would say.
Yeah. To bring up The Godfather again, I don't know where you
Of
are
course.
on the Robert Duvall, Tom Hagen performance, but apparently Jane Campion, I'm not as hot on it as some people are, but Jane Campion instructed Jesse Plemons to watch Tom Hagen, and that was to have
Yeah.
that stillness, that watchfulness to him, and I think you can definitely see that with the George character. I think it really is beneficial that we got Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst here. You know, you mentioned Elizabeth Moss being considered for Rose, and we had Paul Dano, who was considered for George. Talk about There Will Be Blood again.
Yes.
But when you have Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons, they're a couple in real life, so you don't have to stretch further to see their chemistry, to see any type of charm that's there, that's already there for you. That work is done. And I think that I like seeing how she sort of breaks him out of his shell, but we also see some negative qualities of George that I think Plemons demonstrates very well. Of, you know, he doesn't really listen to her. He forces her to play the piano for everyone when she doesn't want to. He lets Phil walk all over him, but there's so much more to that with those brothers. Like, you have to wonder why they're still sleeping in the same bedroom in twin beds after all those years. But yeah, I think that Jesse Plemons, he has a very understated performance here, but that doesn't mean it's any easier. And I'm very happy that he got a nomination too.
Yes, definitely. And I think part of those negative qualities, I felt like I could still just understand him, you know, and just, again, what he's been through. And he assumedly probably didn't have a lot of women in his life to begin with. And so now that he has this one, maybe it's a little bumpy, but eventually I think they do iron things out. So.
Right. And in the book, the George character is very sad. Like, he's pitiful. And so it's easy, I think, to excuse some of his, you know, his weaknesses that you see in the movie.
Yes. Well, I actually also read the book after watching the film. And I do think, just to bring that into it, I do think that it does what a lot of great adaptations should do here. Jane Campion does, I should say, which is to really balance just honoring the source material, but then also either expanding on it or just providing a different interpretation or a point of view on it, at least. Where, you know, I think with the novel, not to sort of jump around, but the novel does have some clear signs, I think, about Phil and his sort of shame of his sexuality. But I think in the movie, I think it's really brought out quite a bit more and made into really almost the root of everything with him. Not just with like the more overt moments like Peter finding the magazines and everything, but just, you know, obviously the symbols we get of like the phallic imagery. I particularly love the scene where Phil is just walking through with that long piece of wood.
Yes.
And he's literally like driving it into the ground and like thrusting it. And we also have a shot of Peter literally bending down from afar as this is happening. Yeah, you could tell that Jane was laughing to herself in these moments, you know, planning some of these shots out with Ari.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think just to sort of talk more about the novel itself, there is a whole subplot, right, of Johnny, which is totally cut out, mostly cut out, only really referenced in the film, that really sort of connects things with Phil in a way that is interesting and, again, is mostly taken out, but I think that's okay in the end. I think that would have made for a more complicated film if we also had this other storyline.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a really strong adaptation, and it shows that you don't need every single detail or every
Right.
single storyline that's present. You can take out a chunk of a book and still have like a very coherent, cohesive story. Part of the way that she's again playing with this movie is she's letting you fill in some of those gaps. She's
Right.
daring you to see it in a new way. And I actually, when I recommend the movie to people now, I recommend the movie before the book, which
Yeah.
I never do. Like I'm always like, read the book first, then do the movie. But here I think it is beneficial to watch that movie and see what she's playing with, and then use the book to fill in any gaps that you might have.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, but the book is beautifully written, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I think it really stands on its own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't feel like, having watched the movie, that it was just like I was reading a plot summary. Like
Right.
it really is good on its own.
It's a true adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does have like a quirky sense of humor with some of Phil's comments are very blunt. I felt just reading it.
Yeah.
But,
and
yeah.
there's an obviousness in the book too, and some of that I think comes up because, you know, if you've seen the movie, you look for those clues, I think, more
Yeah.
readily than you would if you hadn't, but it's all right there in front of you, and some of the language is like, it's very clear, it's very obvious, but it's also beautiful. And it is, you know, it was this cult hit when the book came out, the Thomas Savage novel, and I think it makes sense why. So yeah, I do recommend reading the book to your listeners if they haven't read the book yet.
Yeah, definitely. And well, actually, speaking a little bit to just knowing certain things will happen, I'm curious for you just how much, when you just know everything that's going to happen, how much that feels like it's taking away anything from the ending, or if it feels like it enhances things for you, just to see the sort of the legwork that she does just from the beginning of obviously having the narration with him talking about his mother, to the various references of anthrax, and, you know, we see a dead cow.
So I wouldn't change like my first viewing experience. It was so pure, like not knowing what was
Yeah.
coming. But I think every viewing experience has been somewhat richer. And
Yeah.
part of that I do think is because of how well made it is. When a film is like a true masterpiece and all of the craft elements are working together in the way that they are in this film, it doesn't matter if you know what's coming. I don't think, because you are able then to engage with new details. It's why people who are, you know, art historians or, you know, interested in literature, why they write a thesis on one book or one painting that they've studied for years. Great works of art hold up in that way. And I think that this is a film that really does that. It benefits from multiple viewings, but I don't think that should be a bad thing. I know a lot of people during the season were like, well, you have to watch it twice. You have to watch it 3 times. Whatever. I'm like, but that means it's good.
Yes, that shouldn't be a deterrent.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and it shouldn't, I don't know. That a lot of that discourse was just, I felt like
Yeah.
it was willfully obtuse.
I agree. And
So.
a thing I noticed too when I would rewatch it, I did pick up on this the first time, but even more so the second time, the third time, were just how many similarities Campion was drawing between Phil and Peter that I really loved. So the first one I noticed when I watched it was just when you see Peter hula hooping outside, and then you see Phil spinning that chair inside in a very similar way.
Yeah.
And I love things like that. And you have all of the fire imagery that's associated with Phil. I really love that. You know, Campion talks about how she viewed the character as sort of an animal, like he's this alpha male. And what happens to alphas? They burn bright and then they burn out. So seeing all of that fire imagery associated with Phil, whether it's the rope that's in the house or it's the hot cig passing scene, like you have all of that for him. So I love how she put things in there like that. And yeah, it's a very rewarding watch on the second, third, sixth time.
Sixth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I adore this movie. I just also wanted to note, I mean, I just wrote like a bunch of different randomly non sequitur notes.
Me too.
To just, as I was
I'm, like,
watching
trying
it
to
again.
get them through.
Yes. Question, what do you think of the chapter title cards?
I like if I like them, or
Just, do you think that we need them?
you know, when I recently watched Fanny and Alexander, and I didn't watch the TV version, which has the cards. I watched the theatrical cut, which doesn't, and I think there would have been a way to leave them out, and you still would have known where we were in the story, where the breaks were. I think there's a way to do that more cinematically than have title cards, but they didn't bother me in the moment.
Yeah, I found them a little bit superfluous. I still think this
Yeah.
is like a 5-star film. I just felt like, I don't know if I necessarily need those. Maybe
Yeah.
just in the edit, it felt like choppy a little bit to go
Yeah.
from jumping from different
That's fair.
spaces and time. But yeah, I sort of agree that they could have found a way to more fluidly make those transitions happen.
Yeah.
So that would be my one critique.
I think that's a fair critique. If we
Yeah.
can pick one, that would probably be mine too.
Yes, yes. Before we move on, I do just want to highlight the barn scene at the end, not at the very end, but at the climax between Phil and Peter, which is mostly silent and just like another highlight of so many different brilliant elements of the film, the cinematography, the editing, the score, just the writing and how it just very slowly unfolds. Even just like the sound of like the ash from the cigarette that they're sharing with each other. It's going back to what you're saying, very a sensory experience. And it's very intimate, but it's also like unsettling. And I think it just perfectly nails the blend of how Peter was able to do this for Phil and why Phil was influenced by what Peter was doing in a way that I just love the sort of cat and mouse dance of it. I could watch that over and over.
Yeah. Oh, it's my favorite scene from the movie. One of my favorite scenes of the year. And I remember when I watched it for the first time being like, something's going to happen. Like, we've been waiting all this time. Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
We need to see
it
something
feels like
happen.
this is the scene where
Yeah.
we're going to see something.
Right. And
Yeah.
then it doesn't. But I feel like that's so rewarding that
Yeah.
it kind of fizzles out that way. And you just, all of a sudden, you're like, okay, now I have to reorient myself. Why is Phil missing? Like,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
very good though. And I do agree, like the sound there, the sound work is beautiful. And the camera work is just, I mean, that's why I had a hard time with a lot of the other movies that were nominated for Best Picture, because
Yeah.
it shows what you can do with a camera.
Right. More on that in a bit.
Yes.
But yeah, the actual cut with the ending where we realize what's happened to Phil. I remember being like, wow, I'm like suddenly off balance.
Right.
You know,
Totally
just like,
thrown off.
okay, I'm just like trying to put the pieces together. And then the moment that they mentioned the anthrax, I was just like, oh my God, this is masterpiece. I just, the way that all comes together, again, like this is not a movie that is trying to go for like those cheaper thrills, but just the way that culminates, I feel like is so satisfying in the end. And then of course we get the nice, I was gonna say CODA. Sorry. Just like the aftermath where we do see Peter just sort of smiling to himself like, yeah, I did that shit, you know? Just like very much confident in what he's done and placing the rope under there and seeing his lovely mother and stepfather. When I hear people say that they didn't understand the film or that they didn't get anything out of it, I'm just like, when you see that whole sequence, I just don't really understand how you couldn't.
I I just want to say, like, were you doing your laundry? Were you on your phone? Like, this is not a second screen
part of it. Yeah.
experience.
No.
Like, it's spelled out for you right there. And, you know, I do love that there is an element there where I think, like, okay, because we haven't seen what happens, like, with our own two eyes, like, in the moment, like you would in your traditional Western, it almost feels like Campion, in a way, like how Bronco Henry, Phil, and Peter were the only ones who were able to see the dog. It's something that she's keeping from us strategically. Like, that's something that's between them that we're not able to see. So she has to show us in a different way. We have to open our eyes to it in a different way. And that's when Peter is able to, he's the one who reveals it to us, which I do really like at the very end. And of course we get the title, which is connected to that Bible verse. And if we think about dogs in the Bible, like, dogs aren't, it's not your friendly golden retriever. Like, a dog is a bad person. So you think about what that means, and we have this, those beautiful bookends of Peter saving his mother. He did what he promised us he would do all along. We just weren't looking for it.
Exactly. But now we see the dog, right?
Right there.
But I think that's actually like a metatextual element too, where, like, there's the fact that she is withholding from us those moments like that. I feel like that's part of just the themes of what these characters are going through, the idea of secrets and what happens when you withhold things in your life. And it's just a brilliant adaptation. So
it really is.
I do think it is a film that will endure and will continue to hold up in the years to come, regardless of what happens at any award shows. This is a film that will endure, and I think it will be studied, hopefully, and in so many of these different crafts, like we've been saying. So, big fan of this film.
Yeah.
Just talked about it for an hour, so.
Right. I was like, how much time have we spent on this? We should have had a timer on us. Like, we gotta have our stamina here.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think it has the staying power of any great film, and great films hold up regardless of awards. You know, you think about like when you learn about, when you're studying the Oscars and you look back and you think, wait a minute, How Green Was My Valley? That might be a bad example because that's a good movie, but
secretly a good movie.
Yeah, secretly a good one. But you look back and you think, okay, like, that happened, but that doesn't mean that the movies that were up against it are any lesser than, like, they're still remembered. Yeah. And I love that. And I think that The Power of the Dog will be one of those. I'm really hoping for a beautiful Criterion physical copy that I can have. Yes. Because I know The Irishman got it and Marriage Story, so I'm patiently waiting for when I can get that. But yeah, I mean, it'll be studied for years to come. I think that Jane Campion's legacy is a beautiful one. And, you know, regardless of what else happened, I'm so happy that she won Best Director, because that is going to inspire so many women in the future, so many young girls who, like, see her and are like, you know what? I can make a movie, and I can make a movie about cowboys if I want to. So,
right.
Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so glad, just to speak to her, that this happened. You know, like, what, 12 years after Bright Star was her last film?
Right.
She did Top of the Lake in between that. But I feel like the fact that we got this film when we did, I feel like so many people who hadn't seen a lot of her films before this were revisiting things. And personally, I hadn't seen everything she'd done, and it inspired me to watch her entire filmography.
Me
and
too.
Yeah. And so, yeah, she does really cement her legacy here in many ways. So, okay, let's move on.
It's time.
Yes. When we come back, we will be discussing The Power of the Dog at the Oscars and delving into why it lost Best Picture and why CODA was the winner.
We're going to tell you who the nominees are right now.
Oh, good.
I got you. Belfast. CODA. Don't Look Up. Drive My Car. Dune. King Richard. Licorice Pizza. Nightmare Alley. The Power of the Dog. West Side Story. All right, Liza.
Yes.
Welcome and bienvenue. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here, and especially with you. I'm your biggest fan.
Are you excited to announce Best Picture?
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
the
yeah.
Oscar goes to...
Okay, CODA.
CODA has 3 Academy Award nominations this year, winning all 3 for Actor in a Supporting Role, Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing The Power of the Dog at the Oscars. It was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Jane Campion, Best Actor for Benedict Cumberbatch, Best Supporting Actor for Jesse Plemons, Best Supporting Actor for Cody Smith-McPhee, Best Supporting Actress for Kirsten Dunst, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, Best Production Design, and Best Sound. Whew. And it only won one of those, Best Director. Pretty big one, but only the one. Yeah. And before the Oscars, The Power of the Dog won the Golden Globe for Best Drama. Not that that really matters anymore, but it happened. It won Critics' Choice, it won BAFTA, it won DGA, and a whole bunch of other critics' awards. And then with CODA, it won the PGA, it won the SAG Ensemble, and it won the WGA award, where Power of the Dog was not eligible, but who knows how that race would have gone down if it was. So let's talk CODA, our Best Picture winner of 2021, Sundance Darling. Won a bunch of prizes there, bought by Apple TV for a record $25 million. They released it in August. People seemed to like it, but I don't think it was really like a sensation at that time particularly. So then the year-end awards come around and it starts to gain this insane momentum, the likes of which I really haven't really even seen before. And it goes from this movie that I thought maybe wouldn't really have even made it into a field of 5 to then winning all 3 of its nominations, including Best Picture, and taking down a film like The Power of the Dog that has 4 times as many nominations. So 2 big questions for you.
Okay.
What did you think of CODA? And how did it go all the way and win Best Picture?
Yeah, so I've had the same opinion about CODA the entire time, which is that I thought it was cute. I don't mean that in like a dismissive way. It's just like I watched it as part of virtual Sundance and I was like, oh, that was, a sweet little film. I thought it had some issues with how it portrayed deaf people actually. And I know a lot of people also had issues with that, but that was seemingly ignored. You weren't allowed to say anything bad about CODA the entire season. But it didn't hit me in the same way that it seemed to hit other people. And, I didn't weep when I watched it. I think part of that is because when I watch movies, I'm looking for something else. If I'm thinking of movies that I want in the awards conversation or just films in general. And I think when I'm thinking about like high school films, like Lady Bird was right there and that didn't win a single Oscar. And that to me was something that was far superior to something like CODA. Mm-hmm. I think I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime at the Oscars where something just comes from behind like this. I think that it can be attributed to a lot of things. I think that the first is that we're still in really dark times now, but we were coming out of so many terrible things that were happening, right? We had the trauma of the election and January 6th and COVID still going on. And I think people wanted something happy. They wanted something light and fun that they could watch with their families. And the other options that were there that were similarly light, I mean, we didn't really have very many if you think about it. So, and those didn't connect really in the same way because, you know, something that people thought was a comedy like Licorice Pizza to me isn't a comedy at all. Belfast ends on a really sad note. So West Side Story is really sad at the very end. Yep. So I feel like CODA really benefited from being the one little bright light that was there. And I think in the future we can't underestimate a tech company in the race like Apple, right? They have so many resources. They have so much data. I mean, I saw that ad everywhere all the time. Anytime I took the train, it was there. Anytime I heard the radio, CODA nominated for 3 Oscars, winner of SAG Ensemble. I also think there's a darker thing here, which is that people all season were searching for anything to take the power of the dog down. Why I say darker, I think there was certainly some misogyny involved there when a woman like Jane Campion is winning everything, is so successful in that. I was pretty shocked actually to see people wanting very mediocre men to win over her when she had created something like this. It was like, come on guys, like Kenneth Branagh, like we'll get to Belfast, but it's like no, there's no urgency to give him that award. I'm sorry. Like, we've never had a woman who's won picture, director, and screenplay. And when that became a possibility, people just grabbed onto anything that they thought could maybe be the one. They were incredibly fickle. Maybe it's Belfast. Maybe it's Don't Look Up. Maybe it's West Side Story. Well, maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe you can celebrate her.
Yeah.
But yeah, people were speaking in absolutes. It was incredibly irritating. It's just concerning and weird. And I feel like if you like the Oscars, you know, if you're studying the Oscars, if you claim to care about the future of cinema, why are you doing this? This does not do any good for cinema.
It doesn't really do any good for anyone, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just a negative vortex that you get sucked into. And I think I will just say from experience of working at Gold Derby and just being in the awards race and writing about races like this, people get bored.
Yeah.
And they look for alternate narratives, even if there isn't one, you know? Like, it happened all throughout Nomadland's big sweep all last year.
Right.
People were always like, oh, it's going to be a trial Chicago 7, you know? And it's like, well, okay. Have fun with that narrative. But I think people really do try to spice things up because it makes for a more interesting race. And I definitely agree with you that there was some misogyny there. But I think it's just the bigger thing is just the awards industry complex needs some fixing.
I completely agree.
I'll say that.
Yeah. And it did, and I know we've talked about this on other podcasts or just in our own conversations, but it was so similar to this like Harvey Weinstein Miramax thing to me, where you have this binary of like, vote with your heart. Vote for the movie that makes you feel good. Yep. And it's like, The Power of the Dog made me feel a lot of things, actually. Yeah. It doesn't have to be this binary. And I think I didn't understand the hatred and the rooting against The Power of the Dog, because if I think back, you know, to a Miramax example, if I think like to Saving Private Ryan versus Shakespeare in Love, I can understand why people would want Shakespeare in Love to win, because it's different. We've had so many war films that have won over the years. We've had so many films that center men and violence, no matter how well it's made. You've awarded that director before. Like, there are a lot of reasons why that makes sense.
Yeah.
The reasons against The Power of the Dog didn't make sense.
Right. Well, I think what happened with the race was rather unfortunate, where honestly, even beyond what you're saying there, I do think that it felt like in those last few weeks, especially, you were either big into the power of the dog, and maybe some of that was dismissing CODA, or you loved CODA and you wanted to bring down the power of the dog as this sort of like David versus Goliath type of dynamic, as if CODA isn't owned by Apple.
Right. Yeah. Ugh.
And it's really what has happened with a lot of races. But it was an interesting position to be in for me as someone who really liked CODA, actually, but definitely loved the power of the dog a lot more. And maybe it's because I was on Twitter too much. I don't know. But I did find myself also getting swept up in the anti-CODA sentiment that was... I don't know what level of backlash to the backlash that was.
Right.
But it felt like warring camps at a certain point.
Yeah.
Because,
it was too much.
Yeah. I don't think it's a movie that is particularly outstanding outside of the performances, which I think are pretty great all around, actually. And the way that it's able to communicate sort of a universal type of story and hopefully bring more awareness to deaf stories and show the potential for deaf actors, and to do that more in a way than like give them more complexity than what they've been typecast into. I think that's all a positive that that came out of this. And it's a very heart on its sleeve movie, for better and for worse, where it's very easy to sit down in front of the TV with the whole family and they'll probably enjoy some aspect of it, you know. But I think it's also just a very standard coming of age story. I mean, I think Sean Hayter, definitely had a difficult task in terms of she wasn't deaf herself. She had a lot of challenges that she had to face just in directing the film. But stylistically, craft-wise, it's not very impressive. It has a very TV feeling to it, I would say. But obviously the film really resonated deeply with people. And I think especially the cast was a huge part of it, maybe the major aspect of it, where Troy Kotsur is this incredible discovery. Amelia Jones, I thought, was really good too. Marlee Matlin as sort of the initial face of the film. Daniel Durant, love him too. Just that core four, I think, is a huge part of why the film did as well as it did. And it's the cast that is really what propelled it into that position, more so than the film, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see that. I feel like the cast was the big thing. Like that SAG win. That's when Apple, I think, knew that it had potential there. And one thing I'll be thinking about, and it's so funny because I feel like people who predict the Oscars and write about them are going to be like so just bothered by what this win means for the future. They're going to pay so much more attention to certain things that maybe they don't need to. Maybe this year was a fluke. Maybe it showed that something has changed. But yeah, I don't think CODA is even in the bottom half necessarily of this best picture lineup. So it's not right. It's not that it's a bad movie. It's just that for me, like comparing it to my favorite movie of the year, it's always going to be a losing game for CODA.
Yeah. That's what makes this tough.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, to quote our friend Eric Anderson, he always likes to note, which I think is very insightful, that every race, every year is its own thing. Like, it's not necessarily going to be this pattern now of the Sundance favorite. We're probably not gonna have Cha Cha Real Smooth as our next Best Picture winner.
Help us if we do, please. Kevin, I'll be back again, like crying.
Yes, with the runner-up being the new Martin Scorsese film.
Right. Oh my God.
Yes. But I think it's true that it was lightning in a bottle, really. It's like all of the forces came together for this specific outcome to happen. And it wouldn't have happened maybe even if the Oscars were a month earlier or maybe a month later. I don't know. Things could have taken an interesting turn after.
Yeah.
So it's just circumstantial, really. And when you look at it like that, to me, that would make me feel better about my favorite film losing. Personally, that's kind of how I feel.
That's how I feel too. Ultimately, like, yes, we spend so much time on this, but I think that where I am now is I'm looking at the good things. The good things, The Power of the Dog has an incredible legacy. It's always going to be the beautiful, wonderful film that didn't win and that maybe deserved to win. And what CODA does is it hopefully brings more opportunities for deaf actors. And that, if you look at it that way, I think we're on solid ground, and we're not looking at something that would have been a complete travesty, like Don't Look Up winning, for example. We can look at it very positively.
Yeah. Don't love that timeline.
No.
But you were right there with me. I was in denial about CODA until the end.
Yeah,
I went down with the ship predicting The Power of the Dog, because look at the receipts, look at the nominations, broad support by almost every branch of the Academy. And obviously it did very well with precursors. Jane Campion was such a lock in director. But then I think I was looking past a little bit just the type of film that The Power of the Dog is, where I think even though I would say it's more accessible and was more popular than some of its opponents would like to give it credit for, it's still very dark, and I think it lives in a kind of unpleasant world that can be hard to take, you know, and it doesn't always give you the easy answers or give you those easy, satisfying moments. And that's where I think if it was like a simpler sort of revenge tale, like if it was like True Grit, basically, or even something like No Country for Old Men, then maybe it would have done better. But the fact that it did things a little differently didn't work for some people. And I can accept that.
Yeah. The anti-intellectualism around this movie was so reductive. It like drove me up a wall. Like, if I heard one more person just say like, I don't get it, nobody's gonna get it, doesn't make sense, I'm like, actually, I know a lot of people who don't go to a lot of movies who got it just fine. So like,
on the first watch, in fact.
Like, what is happening here? Again, just incredibly reductive. And don't you want more from your movies? Like, do you always want it to be easy? Ugh, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I will just say, to sort of wrap up this discussion, this section, I just think it is a victory as a fan of Jane Campion's that her film was a major frontrunner at the Oscars and got 12 nominations and just had so much incredible success, to the extent that there was no question at all that she was winning Best Director. There wasn't even an alternative.
Right.
And I think if you just look at that and you just remove yourself from the horse race of it all, that's kind of incredible when you think about it. I never could have expected that as a fan of Jane Campion, like a few years ago even, that would happen for her.
Oh, yeah. Never. You never would have expected that. And we really can't take that for granted. Like, we can be sad about this and, search for answers for what all of it means. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, her victory really cements her legacy and her power as a filmmaker. Right. And I love that for her.
Yeah. I mean, I wish Ari Wegner won cinematography. I think it would have been a great original score winner. And obviously it would get my vote for Best Picture, not to spoil the ending, but
everyone knows.
I think we know that. Yeah. But I think, this is kind of perfect for the film's legacy in the end. It gets to be with films like The Social Network or Raging Bull, even though I love Ordinary People, but certainly Raging Bull has had a legacy. Citizen Kane. Is it necessarily on par with those movies? I don't know. But the point is, like, it will have a legacy, I think, in the end, which is more important.
I agree. And I'm like the Power of the Dog, I'm determined every day to restore the legacy of Ordinary People as the rightful Best Picture winner. Thank you.
And I joined you in that fight. So excited that it was finally released on Blu-ray this year.
Yes, finally.
Yes. Let's get to some questions, shall we?
Let's do it.
We got quite a few about CODA and The Power of the Dog. Zoe G said, why do you think The Power of the Dog went home with only one Oscar when it had the most nominations?
I think a big part of it actually was that Academy voters were pretty lazy this year with checking the box for Dune. They decided to give Dune pretty much up and down craft support, and CODA was so strong that it even was able to pull off adapted screenplay, which was something that was absolutely wild to me, because I even remember at the beginning of the season, before we knew anything about Jane Campion winning director prizes, we were like, well, she'll at least win screenplay. Like, that's definitely a possibility. That's
Smooth
probably
sailing,
most
right?
likely.
Yeah.
So I feel like every other category too, I mean, acting, most of these performances are very subtle. And then you have Benedict Cumberbatch, but he was up against Will Smith, who is your traditional like populist pick. So I feel like it was just to, you know, tap into the title of your show a little bit more. I think it was runner up in every category almost.
Yeah, I do. I think it has the misfortune of being the runner-up in adapted screenplay, cinematography, original score, supporting actor. Like, you know, if things like Dune and CODA aren't there, then it's probably pretty smooth sailing for Power of the Dog to win the most Oscars. It's just, some movies just get unlucky with the competition. So.
Yep, especially Netflix ones.
Yes, specifically. Right. Gabe Guarin said, do you think The Power of the Dog suffered similar backlash that Brokeback Mountain did? Is it conceivable that it was close to achieving the same feat as You Can't Take It With You? So those are two separate questions, but winning picture, director, and nothing else.
So the second question, I mean, I think it was close to doing that. I think if it's our runner-up, I mean, I do think this was a semi-close race. I do think The Power of the Dog still had a lot of support. I'm still hanging on to that, aren't I?
You
Months later.
Yep.
But I don't know, actually. I think that the backlash is maybe similar in that people tend to view queer stories as cold, which I really disapprove of that. I don't like that at all. I think that that's similar, but I do think that the backlash around The Power of the Dog was honestly more around like it having frontrunner status, and like I said, the way that people viewed Jane Campion. So I guess it's similar in some ways, but Brokeback Mountain feels more egregious in its homophobia than The Power of the Dog.
Agreed. Yeah. Brokeback is more explicitly about romance and love. And yeah, I mean, certainly Sam Elliott's comments were interesting, and I don't know how emblematic that was of how other people were feeling in the Academy. Maybe a little bit of xenophobia, which is part of what his comments were. The idea that who's this New Zealand woman who thinks she can direct a movie about the American West? So yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of those factors, and maybe dismissing some of the gay content in the film a little bit. I don't really remember exactly if he did that, but feels like he did. I sort of agree that, you know, the broader frontrunner status was the backlash ultimately. But yeah, in terms of You Can't Take It With You, I think it was very possible that, clearly it was very possible here that it could have been in that territory. People were really very stubborn about the fact that it can't just win one Oscar, it can't just win director, and yet here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. So maybe that's another lesson for awards people. Don't speak in absolutes all the time.
Never. And yet here we are with people already saying things are locked up for next year.
Yep. Interesting how that, as the world turns. All right. So Ronaldo Sosa said, will the gay Cowboys ever win?
I think
Apparently
the gay
not.
Cowboys
Maybe third
win.
time's the charm.
Yeah. I mean, I think the gay Cowboys win just at life, like in
That's
existence.
true.
Gay Cowboys are winners. So I'm viewing it. But
I love that.
yeah. Movies, I mean, who knows? But yeah, in life, they're already winners to me.
Agreed. And the other question was, did you know The Power of the Dog was a queer film before watching it? And if you didn't, what was the moment that first made you catch on?
So I did know beforehand, but I expected it to be more explicit. The moment I saw it, though, in the movie was when Phil, like, sticks his finger in the paper flower. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That's when I was like, okay,
I mean,
this is what
yeah.
we're working with here. That's when I knew.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I definitely knew that it had queer elements going into it just from reading reviews. But yeah, I didn't quite know the extent to which it would factor into the plot and everything. So that was a fun surprise. But definitely the symbolism, I would agree, so definitely tipped me off, as it were. Let's move on to BJ, who said, do you think Jane Campion and the Williams sisters' discourse was really the straw that broke the camel's back in regard to Power of the Dog's momentum, or was it something else?
I mean, I don't really think it had an effect on anything. I think CODA at that point was way too strong. We just didn't maybe see it that way. So while it was certainly a stumble, I don't think it really had the effect that people thought it would, and in some cases people were hoping it would.
Yes, I did notice a number of people latching onto that as a more ammunition, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it helped at all. She didn't win any new fans with that comment.
Right.
I did see at least one honest ballot was talking about how they were kind of turned off by it and made them not want to vote for her or whatever. But yeah, I don't think it really moved the needle too much in the end. But it was a stumbling block. Yeah.
The thing with those ballots, though, you have to wonder if they're cherry picked. You know?
Yeah. I would say that they are. I don't even really wonder. I'm sure that they are.
It's no wondering.
Yeah. Daniel B. said, if the Power of the Dog had gone home empty-handed, who do you think would have won Best Director, and what film could have conceivably been considered the Best Picture runner-up?
So my answer to this is that the only way she's losing Best Director is if Sean Hayter was nominated.
Oh. Yeah.
Like, I don't think anyone else had a chance, really, because I think, yes, like, even if you look at anonymous ballots and things like that, it just doesn't really make sense for any of the other contenders, like any of the other nominees, Brana, PTA, Spielberg, Hamaguchi, to have enough support solidly to win that. I really think the only way she loses is if we have a different place of the momentum of CODA and it happens pre-nominations and Sean Hayter gets in.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, of the other four, I would guess Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
Although part of me does have a feeling that maybe Kenneth Branagh might have just been an alternative, just with the original screenplay win seemed to mean something. So one of those two, I don't really think Hamaguchi or PTA would have won in most scenarios. Alicio Martinez said, what are your takes on the teacher character in CODA, Eugenio Derbez as Mr. Villalobos? I found him super cringy and oddly written, but seemed to be in the minority there. I don't know if that's true. I did see a lot of criticism of that character and the way that he played it.
You go first on this one.
Okay, well, definitely the weak link seems a little out of place in the film. That's the part that really felt like TV to me. Like it really was verging into like, am I now watching Glee?
You said it.
Yeah, like he has his moments, but yeah, pretty broad considering the movie isn't really that kind of movie.
Yeah, and that part of the story also didn't make sense because while Amelia Jones is a talented performer and she gives a good performance, I don't think she is a strong enough singer to warrant that level of cringeworthy attention from a choir teacher.
Fair. So you objected to her getting special treatment.
That's part of it, but also that it felt like Glee.
Yeah. Luca Giliberti said, considering CODA apparently tugged at people's heartstrings and surged in March, do you think a later Oscars date would have allowed that initial response to die down and in turn perhaps not swayed voters as much as it arguably did?
Well, first, hi, Luca. Luca became like a dear friend of mine throughout this whole process as a fellow Power of the Dog fan.
Love you, Luca.
I think that's definitely possible. We can never tell like when momentum is going to change and if CODA would have been able to withstand that. What's weird to me is that CODA came out so early, and by the time it had gotten all this momentum, every other film had kind of already been through it. Like, it had gone through its backlash cycle, or it had gone through its time when people thought it was going to win and then didn't perform. So I can't really see what other film could have gotten a similar type of momentum after CODA, unless it just swung back to The Power of the Dog somehow. It's possible.
I don't think that it would have swung back. I think it just would have made it a closer race if the CODA momentum died down. But I feel like once you lose the momentum, I think it's kind of hard to really get it back.
Yeah.
With things like this, unfortunately.
I agree.
We got a whole bunch of questions. I'm just going to condense them, just asking what would have happened basically if CODA had peaked earlier, or if it had more nominations. Like Andrew Carden said, why did Marlee Matlin? Why was she never a force in the race? It is interesting. It is kind of a mystery to me, ultimately, that happened. She's a former Oscar winner who I think was probably the access point for a lot of people, like I said, in this cast full of unknowns.
Right.
You know, I think maybe if she had more meaty scenes like Troy did, honestly, then she probably would have gotten in everywhere. But honestly, I think she only really has the one scene where she's on the bed talking to Ruby about the day of her birth. That's really the only showy moment, I would say, for her. It's just not really a showy part.
Yeah, that's such a mystery to me, because when the movie won all of those awards at Sundance, I was like, oh, Marlee Matlin, supporting actress nomination. That feels like a slam dunk, regardless of what she did or didn't have to do. Like, that felt pretty obvious to me. So it was strange to me that a movie that seemingly had all the support couldn't get Marlee Matlin, at least.
Very strange. But do we think, as Prettier Jesus, Oscar H., and Gabe Guarin they all asked the same question, that if it was peaking earlier, that we would have gotten Marlee Matlin or Best Editing or Best Original Song, maybe Best Director for Sean Hayter? What do we think?
I think at the very least we would have gotten Marlee Matlin and Original Song.
Yes,
these nominations
agreed.
actually missing, that was part of the reason why I didn't predict CODA to win Best Picture. I was like, we need more nominations. Where are the nominations? I actually don't think editing or cinematography would have happened.
No.
It's just not a tech player. It's not the type of movie that ever is. I do think if it really was really strong early, we could have seen Emilia Jones get into actress, because the Best Actress situation was so strange all year, really. And I do think she would have taken Kristen Stewart's spot. But
wow, rude.
I know. Yeah.
Fighting words. Yes.
I'm not saying it should have happened.
No,
but...
I know. That, like, you knew exactly which one would, but I agree.
Pushing the button. Yeah.
Yep. But I think Sean Hayter probably still would have been overlooked in director, honestly. I don't know if that's a hot take, but
no, I think that's right.
I get why people say that she would have made it if it peaked earlier, but I think the lineup we got was pretty rock solid, and it's just not really the kind of film that gets nominated in Best Director. That doesn't appeal to the director's branch, you know?
Right. I think if she would have gotten a nomination, she would have won if the movie peaked early. Like, that's definitely a possibility that we would have to think about, because the whole body votes on director. I think we need to be grateful every day that Campion won and that nominations came out when they did. But she's not, that type of directorial achievement is not something that branch recognizes.
Right. So Eric Maxwell Brunn said, with CODA only available on Apple TV, will it become one of the more forgettable winners for Best Picture?
Yes, I think so.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think part of it's streaming, part of it's content, honestly, like what the movie is, how it connects with people. People have already seemingly forgotten about it and are talking about other movies that were in the race. So,
well, I'm also just going to get on my soapbox a little bit here, so bear with me.
Do it. Let it out.
Apple is making a huge mistake by not releasing CODA on DVD or Blu-ray. That still has not happened, at least in America. I think it was released in like Japan, but I think there was some different kind of deal there. But by only having it on Apple TV Plus, I think it's really limiting the audience that could have really gotten a lot out of it, like older generations. Like I actually saw a number of different posts from just librarians like talking about how their patrons had been requesting CODA like left and right after it won Best Picture, and they had to tell them like, no, it doesn't have a physical release, like it's only on Apple TV Plus. So it's like it's being denied to them. So yes, I do think there's a lot of potential for it to become forgettable because streaming isn't permanent. So what if you wanted to show this in like a school or somewhere that doesn't have high-speed internet? Like you couldn't really do it. And I think that's a shame.
I agree. I mean, all Best Picture winners should be easily accessible.
In different formats.
Yes.
Yeah. So, end of soapbox. Marcel said, so CODA did the smallest clean sweep since Grand Hotel. Discuss and rank all clean sweeps. Do you want to rank them?
Yes, I can rank them. So
just as a recap, we have CODA with 3. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King went 11 for 11. Gigi and The Last Emperor had 9 for 9. It Happened One Night had 5, and then Wings had 2, and then Grand Hotel had the 1.
Okay.
So that's 7.
Yeah. So I have my ranking.
Okay, great.
It Happened One Night is far and away number 1. Then I actually have Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, then The Last Emperor, then Grand Hotel, then Wings, then CODA, then The Fiery Pits of Hell, and then Gigi.
Yes. I also have It Happened One Night number 1, and then Lord of the Rings number 2. I have Wings number 3, Last Emperor number 4, CODA number 5, Grand Hotel number 6, and then easy last place for me is Gigi.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that. Just the worst introduction to a film is Maurice Chevalier singing about Thank Heavens for Little Girls.
Ooh.
Anyway.
So bad. Yeah.
Let's move off of that. I don't want to live in that headspace. Francisco Ormazabel said, is CODA the worst winner ever? Or the second worst? Those are our options.
No. It's not the first or the second because we have Cimarron, we have Tom Jones. Like, there are plenty that are worse.
Cavalcade. Yep.
Gigi. So
Gigi. Definitely worse. Yeah.
Cavalcade. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Even Green Book is worse than CODA.
Agreed. Yeah.
So
when people say that, I think it's recency bias, honestly.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I don't think CODA is a great winner. I don't think it has lasting, like, staying power, but it's not even in the bottom tier for me.
No, I agree. Zombie Socks 009 said, if Amelia Jones had been nominated, do you think she would have won?
No.
I doubt it.
Yeah. I think Jessica Chastain, like, she had the overdue narrative. She had that makeup combo, transformation. Amelia Jones, I mean, it would have been like Saoirse Ronan getting nominated for Lady Bird, which was a great nomination, but it's not a winning role. Yeah.
Right. Or like a Elliot Page for Juno.
Yes.
Possibly. That sort of narrative. Yeah. Definitely welcome to the club, but you're not winning.
Right.
Yeah. Our friend Ryan McQuaid said, since Apple is the first streamer to win Best Picture, do you think this will jumpstart a trend of future Best Picture winners from streamers? Also, with The Lost, does this once and for all prove that there is a bias against Netflix, and will they ever win Best Picture?
So with the streaming conversation, I think it definitely opens the floodgates. Like, now they've done it, now they are more likely to do it again.
Yep.
And as more awards-friendly contenders are released onto streamers, I think it's more likely that this will happen. I do think, though, what we've seen with the summer box office, there is an appetite to go back to theaters. So I do not think it's going to happen again next year. I don't see it. If Killers of the Flower Moon wins and Scorsese wins another one, great. But I hope that Netflix doesn't win next year. I'm not eager to give Iñárritu another.
I can't do that again.
I can't go through it again. We can't. We've been there. We've done that. We can't do it again. So I mean, bias against Netflix, possibly, but I think it more so has to do with the type of film that Netflix puts into the race. They're more cerebral. They're by auteurs. They're not easy watches. Like, you think of The Irishman or The Power of the Dog or Roma. Like, these are all great films that I love, but they're not easy.
Even Marriage Story.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think they need to have a film in the race that is like CODA, or the kind of like more life-affirming, positive feeling film, and not necessarily the movie that you respect, quote unquote.
The problem with Netflix, though, when they make movies that are like cheery and joyful, they're really ugly or really bad. It's like intense primary colors.
Netflix
like, it's a
lens.
Netflix problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Got to find some sort of balance there. All right. Well, let's transition very gracefully with this next question. Actually, this provides a great transition from our friend Christoph, who said, do you remember there was a Best Picture nominee called Belfast? Because I don't. Sophia, do you remember? There was actually a film directed by Kenneth Branagh, and it was about his childhood, and it was in black and white, and it was Belfast. That's what it was called.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I lie in bed awake at night thinking of this movie because my favorite working director is Paul Thomas Anderson, and this man who cheated on Emma Thompson stole his Oscar.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I do remember it, even though it is a completely forgettable film.
Yes. Okay. I was going to ask what your thoughts are on Belfast, and there we have it.
Yeah. The thing is like, when I saw Belfast, I had a nice time, actually. I thought it was nice.
Nice.
And I liked it. It's just nice. It has no substance, and for something that's an autobiographical film, it tells you absolutely zilch about the creator. Nothing.
He likes movies. I told you that. And isn't that interesting?
Yeah, sure.
A director likes movies.
Wow. I wonder why he's a director.
Yes.
I mean, the screenplay win is just absolutely egregious. People tried to make this happen all year. People are going to say it's because it won Critics' Choice, but it didn't. It was just a weird split thing that happened, I think, with The Worst Person in the World. I love that film. We can talk about that later maybe, but that coming in, I think, definitely altered the formula for what was happening in the category. But yeah, the screenplay is just, it's pedestrian and banal. Nothing about it indicates that it's well written or a movie that should win this particular Oscar. They rewarded the guy who wanted an Oscar. He really wanted an Oscar. He made it clear that he wanted it. And the thing about people like Branagh, I'm letting it all out today.
Please.
When you have the type of person who usually makes mediocre work as of late, and they make something that is better than their recent work, people are impressed. When you have a filmmaker like PTA, who made arguably the greatest film of the 21st century, who made a film where Daniel Day-Lewis is a fashion designer that's just stunning, and make something a little bit different for him, they're going to be like, well, I mean, it's not A+, it's A-. We're going to give him an award for an A+. Meanwhile, look, Kenneth Branagh got a B. Wow. Let's give it to him.
Well, he directed Artemis Fowl, so it could only go up from here.
Exactly.
But I agree. I think people were definitely grading on a curve when it came to Mr. Branagh, unfortunately. No disrespect to his childhood. I understand it was a difficult one in some respects, growing up in the Troubles, which is depicted in the film. I personally sort of found it interesting the way that it was crafted in terms of it felt like very like vignettes, interspliced. It felt like sort of him accessing different memories of his past, not so much doing like a super concrete story for better or for worse. But I did find that element to be interesting. I also saw this with a huge sold out crowd, which I was not expecting going into that theater of many a senior citizen. And they really ate it up. I mean, this was like the Spider-Man No Way Home experience for the older crowd.
Yeah.
They really were into it. And I think part of that influenced how I felt about the film, which I walked away from being like, well, that was a very nice movie. I had a nice time with it. And then as the months went on, I sort of forgot what I had seen, which is why when we were going to do this show, I actually rewatched Belfast at home last week. Yeah, it's a quick watch. It's, less than 100 minutes.
Yeah.
Does not hold up.
No.
I think it's like whatever that version is that people talk about when they go to a festival and like the creators are there and the actors are there and everyone's giving it a standing ovation. You kind of get like sucked into it. That's how I felt being in this crowd of lovely senior citizens who were really eating up this film. And then when I went home to watch it by myself, does not hold up. It really doesn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I had a similar experience with that. Like, I watched it in a theater and had a great time because people were laughing along and it was very cheerful. But yeah, it's unfortunately one of those movies where I don't like it anymore at all because of its Oscar win. And I need to just own up to that. It happens sometimes.
Fair. I also think the black and white doesn't really serve the story particularly. Especially because there's kind of like a artificiality to it. I find that sort of undercuts just what the reality of it is for me. And yeah, it's pretty broad. It's arguably generic, which, as you were saying, like it shouldn't feel that way if this is your childhood.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I liked some of the actors. I thought Katrina Balfe was very good. I was charmed by Judi Dench. Kieran Hines, Jamie Dornan got to sing. That was fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wish that it sort of came together for me. It had a nice, I wouldn't say some of its parts, but I liked different elements of it. It just really doesn't really come together as a film for me.
Yeah. I think that's completely fair.
Yeah.
And I've already brought up how green was my valley, but that's what he was searching for here.
Yeah.
Child performance, the vibe, the direction, everything.
Yeah.
And he didn't get it.
Nope. So that's Belfast. I really don't have a lot else to say on it, unfortunately.
I think I got it out.
And we're already spending a lot of time on this episode, so let's just move on to another fun film, Don't Look Up. So this is what I would say is the third film in a trilogy from Adam McKay after The Big Short and Vice that is about a capital I important issue. This one isn't based on a true story like those were, but in a sense, it's hard to not just lump in this with the other two, just, based on current events, climate change, it's a satire. I remember you did not care for this film. That's one that I specifically remember your opinion on.
Yes. So on my show, Oscar Wilde, Nick and I try to stay relatively positive throughout the season.
Yeah.
And it's for that reason that we did not cover this monstrosity at all. We never had an episode on it. This movie is like watching an episode of Pod Save America on TikTok. It is smug, it is poorly written, and the performances are straight up bad. If Meryl Streep is bad in a movie, you have a problem with the direction. It's one of the movies last season that it was actually my least favorite film of the year. Like bottom.
Period.
Period.
Wow.
This was one of the movies last season I thought about walking out of multiple times. It's ugly. The shots are just that like Netflix oversaturation. I can't recommend anything about it. I just think it's a pile of trash. I'm sorry. Like,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
hate this movie. And I don't
Well-
say that often about movies. I just like, this was a painful experience for me. I don't like it. I don't think it deserves to be here at all.
It's very long too. It's like almost 2.5 hours.
long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, I liked The Big Short, despised Vice. That's
Yeah.
one that I definitely wanted to walk out of. But with this, I was like cautiously optimistic because I was like, well, he's not necessarily doing like a true story. You know, it's going to be maybe harkening back to older Adam McKay, more broad comedy. I liked a lot of these stars, obviously, like one of the best casts that's ever been assembled, basically. So I was open to liking this. But once again, I felt like we got this very lecturing tone from Adam McKay that is so tiring. And it felt like there was potential to be smart about what it's sort of satirizing and just more clever and more deft with the approach. Sort of like a Doctor Strangelove. Like that's
Yeah.
the best case scenario for what this film is. But what they did is just, I feel like, going for such low-hanging fruit. And especially the stuff with Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill and
Yeah.
whatever the hell it was that Mark Rylance was doing. I still am baffled by what was
Yeah.
happening there. It's just, you know, stuff about people are too obsessed with celebrities and media is complicit in all of this. And it's just all of these things that felt very condescending the way that it was approached.
Yeah.
And it just felt to me like, I don't know how exactly this was written, but it felt like a bunch of obnoxious guys in a writer's room for some late night show decided to make like a 2.5 hour movie instead
Yeah.
of an opening monologue for their show. There's just so little nuance to it that I just don't know like who it was for other than just to be like self-satisfying.
Yeah, and you know, when I saw it, I saw a Q&A with Adam McKay after, and it felt that way. He couldn't really like speak to that, and it did feel like it was something just that was a passion project of his, and there was just no substance there, which made me
Yeah.
sad. I mean, you think like what could have been, like we could have had a network, we could have had a
Right.
Doctor Strangelove, like you said, and I know people tried to compare it to those, but it wasn't that.
No. If I were to note some positives, because I don't despise the film necessarily personally, I do think that there are good performances. Like I think Jennifer Lawrence is pretty good here. Leo is good. I imagine he was close to a nomination, possibly.
Yeah.
I also think as a story, there's just more momentum to it, at least, that is more engrossing to me than something like Vice, which is just like, I don't know what the story even is.
Right.
And I think the actual ending sequence is pretty well done. But yeah, it's just another one of these films that is not on my wavelength, I would say.
Yeah.
And it won the Writers Guild Award, which is why some people were probably predicting it to win the Oscar too. And honestly, if it was as good as what it was aspiring to be, and if it was just better by a little bit, or maybe more dramatic with its tone, then maybe it really could have won, because it seems like the kind of screenplay that wins original screenplay. But it wasn't
for
good,
sure.
so there you are.
For sure. Yeah, it feels like it's that timely story, and I'll say some positives too. I won't be a
Okay.
full
You don't have
curmudgeon.
to.
Just two though. I agree with you on Jennifer Lawrence. Like I really liked her in this. She was the shining star for me. And
Yeah.
I like Nicholas Bertel's score.
Yes, he never misses.
No, he doesn't.
Well, Scott Copeland asks us, why don't look up?
I'll always ask that question too. I mean, I feel like the Academy and celebrities can't resist this type of movie, this type of like
yeah.
self-important, self-righteous film. Like
We're
I
doing
just remember
something for the
Julia
world.
Fox. Yeah, like Julia Fox posted on her Instagram story like how this movie like changed the way that she viewed the world, and I was like, dear
dear.
God, like we might be headed towards an Oscar winner here. So yeah, I think it's just the type of movie that people in Hollywood can like.
Right. And it makes people feel like by voting for it that they're doing something good in the world.
Yep.
Has it done good for the world? I don't know.
Not today.
Evidence not cited. So
Yeah.
Fritz asks us, would 2002 to 2010 Meryl have been nominated? This is an interesting question because Meryl, I don't want to say she's in her flop era,
Oh my.
but she hasn't been nominated since 2017.
Yeah.
This is the longest she's gone without a nomination in her career. I do think she maybe would have fared better if we were still in that really great sort of sweet spot in the 2000s with her. But I also think like this part is just way too goofy for her to make it, regardless of whether she's good or bad. It's just not really, not really it.
I think if she was more of a lead in that time, she would have gotten in. Like if the president character was a lead, I think absolutely. Like if we think of goofy Meryl, like Florence Foster Jenkins, that happened.
Sure. Yeah, true.
But yeah, I think it's too strange and the role is too small.
Yeah. And Cinema Sex Kitten said, this is Meryl Streep's longest run without a nomination. Do you think it's just the parts she's playing, or do you think we have reached Streep fatigue?
I think it's more so the parts that she's taking than Streep fatigue. Yeah. I do think if she worked with a really strong director, like if she would have, I don't know, if she's in a Spielberg movie or something like that, she can find her way back in very easily.
Yeah. Yeah, this is not the last we've seen of Meryl at the Oscars.
No.
Her last nomination will not be The Post.
Right.
Rest assured. All right, well, let's move on to hard pivot to Drive My Car.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, going from two films that are probably the most straight down the middle types of films of this bunch to one that is very art house in a way that I'm still a little surprised that it went the distance here and got as many nominations as it got. And, I certainly don't mean that in like a disrespectful way to the film. If anything, it's more of a discredit to the Academy that I don't expect films like this to be nominated. Like a 3-hour contemplative non-English language film that is subtle, and the fact that it did resonate with Oscar voters was like one of my favorite Oscar stories of this past year. That's one of the positives I can think of from this past year.
I love this movie. I am like, finally a great nominee to talk about. Yeah. This movie definitely rewards patience, and if you are patient, it punches you right in the stomach in the best way. I'm still in awe of and at a loss when I am asked to describe the ending, because I think it just sticks the landing so well. It's just tremendous. It's so beautifully made, and I'm so happy that Hamaguchi got in and that it won all of the awards that it did, and it was a Best Picture nominee. That's really cool. And I do think it says something that critics, when they stick behind one thing, when they all sort of consolidate and support and uplift one international film, I never thought it was going to be this one. Yeah. Just straight up did not think so, because it's a 3-hour Japanese film that's about suffering, the suffering of being alive and knowing that more suffering is inevitable, but you're going there anyway. That's not an Oscar contender on paper, but it somehow was. And I love that it was. I think it's just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, when I first watched this, I thought it was great and very well observed, and just the way it's talking about grief and also the importance of connecting with other people and sort of breaking barriers. I wasn't quite in like the 5-star camp like some critics, but still very much respected it. But then when I watched it a second time, because sorry to brag, but I was assigned to interview Ryusuke Hamaguchi, the director, it really opened up for me in a lot of ways. And I found that it's like once I knew what the destination was, it's like I sort of found the journey there to be a lot more satisfying. because watching it for the first time, I just had a lot of different scenarios playing out in my head about like where this was going, and even what kind of film this would be, whether there might be like a shift in tone or something, like to something darker, more propulsive, I guess. So watching it again and just sort of getting to relax into it like a warm bath, it was like much more satisfying because I knew what I was really getting myself into. So yeah, I would definitely recommend for people who were maybe underwhelmed or didn't quite get the hype for it at first when they saw it, to definitely watch it again, just to really sink in what the message is for the film. And the Uncle Vanya connection is really rewarding on a second watch as well, once you see all the connections there. And thankfully, speaking to physical media, it's getting a Blu-ray release on Criterion literally this month as this episode is coming out. So I hope people check it out, either seeing it again or for the first time. So
it's what I'm going to use my Criterion gift card on. I've already decided. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the way that the film really went from like the festival darling to that was beloved by some people, but maybe were writing off as like a best picture player, to then being rewarded by all these different critics groups at the end of the year. And then, you know, the distribution company, Janus Films, which is not in the business of Oscar campaigning.
Right.
And yet it managed to actually organically make its way into the race. Best picture, director, screenplay. It's just, to me, like, this is the underdog story of the year, not CODA, you know?
Yes.
The fact that we could get, like, again, CODA had Apple behind it. Drive My Car had a studio that's never campaigned for anything regarding awards. And it just got in on its own merits because people really liked it. And that is something that I really hope continues. If there's going to be a new pattern going forward, is that we do get these more organic, emerging films that just are propped up because they're just really good films. That's just what this should be. It shouldn't be campaign driven, even though that's literally what it's been since the beginning. But hopefully we're in a more organic future, perhaps. I don't know.
I hope so too. And I always talk about how I wish we could go back to 5 Best Picture nominees. Yeah. This is what proves me wrong. This is what 10 nominees can do. Yeah.
Amen. Let's move on to Dune. So, yeah, going from the art house to the massive blockbuster. Obviously, this one was very much anticipated. The David Lynch one in the 80s had its charms, but even David Lynch himself doesn't really defend that film at this point. So, yeah, part of it was just like having to cram that entire story into 2 hours. And as we see from this adaptation, that was just not really possible with this story. So, yeah, it's sort of like Fellowship of the Ring, Kill Bill Volume 1, if you will, where certainly there's a lot that happens and your mileage may vary on like whether those films were satisfying on their own. I think they are. And I think with this, for a lot of people, it was satisfying, but not necessarily everyone felt that way. And I would include myself in that. I sort of felt like I watched half of a movie and then I walked out and I was like, this should be where the intermission is, and I should come back in 15 minutes and see the rest of the story, and yet I actually have to wait 3 years for the rest of the story.
Yeah, I'm with you. The part 1 excuse just like doesn't work for me because we've had plenty of other films that are part 1s that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I felt the same way when this ended. I was like, oh, we're ending here? And I read the book before I saw the movie, and that I think almost made me more dissatisfied with where it ended because I was like, oh, here? Interesting. Okay. I do think it's a stunning technical achievement. I will note too, like, I'm not the biggest Denis Villeneuve fan. I usually find his movies to leave me pretty cold and to be much more about the world building and about the text than about characters. And that's what was sort of missing for me here. I felt that there wasn't a lot of character development, and I need character development in order to feel emotionally connected to a film. Yeah. So that was just missing for me. But I do think it's a stunning technical achievement. And I'm excited for part 2, whatever that brings, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of part 1.
Yeah. Just from watching it in the theater, I do think that experience was probably one of my favorite experiences in a theater over the past few years, definitely, just because of obvious reasons with the state of the world. It was like watching Dune was like, wow, this is like the theatrical experience right here. But then this is also one that I decided to watch again for this, just to watch it on my TV, just to see whether it held up in that setting. And I surprisingly found that it did. I think in a strange way, it's like a very comforting feeling that I got from it, if that makes sense, in the sense that like something about the tone felt very even, and there's like this like low hum to it that I found to be strangely peaceful.
It
I
is
don't know
peaceful.
why.
No,
Even
it
though
is sort
there's,
of like an
you know,
ASMR film.
Yeah,
like
it has like action sequences and everything, and there's explosions, but in between there's like this very it's not really like a lot of bigger movies that come out these days. It sort of has its own language to it, which is part of just what this should be, you know. So I weirdly connected to that aspect of it. Obviously, like you were saying, all the visuals and the sound work is incredible work. No notes. Agree with you on characters. Not a lot there. I sort of wish there was a little more variety in just the tone, even though I mentioned, like, obviously it has a nice even tone. I did wish for some things a little more color, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So I also sort of wanted it to be a little more playful, I guess, like a little funnier maybe.
Yeah. He has
Like,
trouble with that. He's so serious. Like everything about his filmmaking, I feel like, is so gray, and it's very Canadian.
Right. Yes, he's very serious, like, and I didn't really expect it to be like, he's not like Nora Ephron. Like, that's, I'm not expecting something very wry and witty about these situations, but yeah, I think there's just a little bit of that missing there, that piece that I sort of wanted to be more, I guess, stimulating on a character level, on an emotional level than what we get.
Yeah.
I like Timmy. He's very fun in this. I was surprised how much I found him to be really fitting of this role.
It is a good role for him. It's definitely a good fit. And when you read the book, like, I already knew the casting when I read the book, but he does fit Paul Atreides very well. So I agree. Good casting.
Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah.
Love her.
She was great.
Yeah.
I just wanted
Charlotte Rampling.
more. Oh, my favorite, actually. Charlotte Rampling.
Yes. Torturing little Timmy.
Love it.
Love that for her. Yeah, I sort of wanted to love this film. Like, a lot of people seem to really be like, oh my God, I love Dune.
Right.
But I haven't quite gotten there yet. I don't know if I will at some point.
Nothing's worse than that feeling where
Yeah.
everyone just loves something so much and you're like, did I miss something here? I don't know.
Yeah. We'll see. Dune Part 2, maybe it'll really come through with the emotions at the end.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book, so I don't really know.
It's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mr. Entertainment said, everyone is going to assume The Power of the Dog was the runner-up, but could it have been Dune? It didn't get the director nom, but did get into picture and dominated the crafts.
I would say no, because I do think that the director snub is a major red flag. I think that you have to pay attention to that. And I mean, the Academy didn't really care about craft support this year because CODA didn't have any craft nominations. So
Clearly, right.
I mean, sure, I bet it was high up in the ballot. I think it was definitely in the top 5.
4 or 5. Yeah. But it's tough to not have director support or actor support.
Right.
Like, I mean, Mad Max got 6 wins too, and I wouldn't consider that a runner-up in 2015. And George Miller got into Best Director, so I think Dune was in a similar position, if not worse, than Mad Max Fury Road. So
I agree.
yeah. Miles McHale said, which performer from Dune would you nominate if you had to?
Charlotte Rampling in supporting actress. I'll do it.
For
Sure, for her
her-
little cameo.
Yes. Her
No,
one-scene wonder.
my real answer is probably Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah, I wouldn't have nominated her, but if I had to,
Yeah.
then I would say Rebecca for sure. Let's move on to King Richard. This is a loaded one at this point, but let's get into it. Biopic, Richard Williams, father of Venus and Serena Williams, setting them on the path to be who they would be, the biggest tennis stars in the world. Definitely a transformational performance from Will, but I think still him just very much in movie star commanding spirit that really has made him a star for as long as he's been a star. Yeah, I found this to be very watchable, even though it's almost 2.5 hours. You know, I think it goes by pretty quickly, and that's a credit to Pamela Martin, who is nominated, which I was glad to see her nominated. I mean, for me, it's like, it's a film that doesn't really reinvent the wheel by any means. Like, it's pretty by the book, sort of standard FX cable movie for me.
Yeah.
That is very satisfying to just watch, and you can walk in and out of the rooms and you won't miss too much. You'll sort of get those satisfying moments and you don't have to pay too much attention to what's actually happening, which is fine. Some movies can be that. But it's just, you know, one of the films in the race that I like, but don't necessarily feel like, does it deserve to be here? I don't know.
Yeah. For me, this movie has a stronger case than CODA for being the crowd pleaser film that I would vote for. I think that technically the editing is really strong. All of those tennis sequences, I was like really, on the edge of my seat for. I also think that the performances are really strong, especially like in comparison. I love Ingenue Ellis in this movie. I think she sort of steals it right out from under Will Smith. And that's sort of her role in the family as well. She's this sort of leading matriarch. While he thinks he's running everything, she's the one who's really in charge. I thought she was great. I love John Bernthal. What a great use of John Bernthal in a supporting role. And, you know, I don't think that the Will Smith win is a bad Best Actor win. He's not who I would have voted for, but I do think he gives a good performance. But I agree, it is like very by the book. And, you know, when I did a little experiment when I was prepping for this podcast. I was writing out the other Best Picture nominees, and this was one of the two that I forgot, actually.
Oh, no.
So that is maybe a problem, but yeah, I don't think it has maybe much staying power, but I think it's solid. Very watchable, like you said.
What's the other one?
It's coming.
Have we
very
not talked
soon.
about it yet?
We haven't talked about it yet.
I feel like I probably know just by
Yes.
process of elimination, but yes. Yeah, for me, this is sort of like the Ford v Ferrari of the race in the sense that, like, it's not really doing anything super outstanding for me outside of the performances.
Yeah.
I do love that Ingenue Ellis was nominated. I know that was sort of in doubt for a little bit whether she would be, but such a phenomenal character actress who's been killing it for years, finally getting this big opportunity, and I hope that this leads to even more exciting stuff from her. Yeah, just really well done, straight down the middle. That in a way I do like this kind of film at this point, because I feel like these kinds of films are becoming more obsolete, like these kind of mid-budget dramas. Even though it's a sports drama, it feels mostly like drama to me. That I hope that these kind of movies can still be made when it feels like we're now just doing blockbusters and indies and not much in between.
Yeah, it does feel like that sort of like 90s adult drama, family drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, let's move on to Licorice Pizza.
Yay.
Well, yeah, I'm going to let you take the lead on this one, even though I also loved this movie.
Yeah.
Licorice Pizza, Paul Thomas Anderson's homage to the early 70s in Los Angeles. Take it away. Why did this film resonate with you as much as it did?
Yeah. So I really wasn't sure what to make of this, because I actually tend to prefer PTA's like singular character stories over his larger ensemble films. I like my favorite PTA films are There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread, both, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. They are just like towering cinematic achievements that have dark comedy in them. But, I was a little worried about this because I didn't love Inherent Vice. So I wasn't sure what to make of it. And I think it's important to note that 3 of my favorite movies of all time are Nashville, Harold and Maude, and Shampoo. And this feels like all 3 of those put together just made this movie. And I think, this movie is hilarious at parts. Yes, it feels like you're watching some easy breezy 70s comedy, but then it tricks you into thinking that that's what it is. It's really not. It's really about men and how dangerous they are. It's about fetishes. It's about disappointment. There's always, with PTA films, what I always love is that there's darkness in the light. And if you let that hit you, it's a very powerful feeling. Just much like the character Matthew says to Alana at the end, you have a very powerful feeling. That's how I feel about his films to me. And not to get personal, but there is something that a lot of people missed, which is that I saw in particular a lot of people complaining that like the Alana half is darker and why are all these men suddenly coming into it? And I think, and maybe this is just me, but I doubt it because Alana experiences this in the movie, but there's something like very real and very awful about being a woman in your early 20s that I remember like so vividly that it's horrible, which is that when you're like 19 or 20, you are all of a sudden getting equal parts attention from teenage boys who you have to stay away from because they're teenage boys and 50-year-old men. And you do not know what to do with yourself. You do not feel like a human. You feel like you are just existing in this world and you don't have any clear direction of where to go or who you are or who you can become. And this is the first time in a movie I've ever like been like, whoa, that's very much something that happens. And I feel seen in a way that is like, I'm like, I don't want to sit here in this. It's really icky. But I think his movies always do make you feel sort of gross on purpose. That's certainly part of the experience, and that doesn't always work for everyone. And I'm fine if that doesn't work for everyone, but I definitely urge people who have issues with the age gap here to look at it with a little bit of nuance, which is that characters in this movie lie. They lie and they're unsure all the time, and there's a lot of ambiguity around the ages. And I'm not saying that, that's the type of relationship you should pursue. I don't look to my movies to inform my decision making in life. I think that they're movies. And if you get into like movies should have good morals, I mean, people can listen to your show for great recommendations of movies that were made during the Hays Code.
Yes. Some of these people that we see on Twitter sometimes would have loved the Hays Code of the 30s and 40s, seeing all the wonderful moral messages that came out of Hollywood,
right?
With no flaws. Yeah.
So what do you like about it?
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
I think what he does best for me is presenting relationships that are complicated and messy and kind of thorny sometimes, like in Phantom Thread and, The Master, Punch Drunk Love, Magnolia, like it's pretty common. He's very interested in just the lives of people who are just trying to find purpose and just find their place in the world. And maybe they do some questionable things sometimes. And, in the case of this film, even Alana is like bringing up how it's actually really weird that she hangs out with Gary and his 15-year-old friends all the time. It's not like the film is really even endorsing this relationship as some people seem to have taken it as some kind of like ideal thing. If anything, I feel like most of the film is just spent with them just being friends or like partners, even though there's references to maybe a relationship or like romance at times, but to me it just sort of plays more like a hangout movie, more so than like a rom-com, where she's finding someone that she connects with on a deeper level. And Gary is clearly kind of enamored with her, in some level, but he's also so busy all the time with all his businesses and everything that it's not like either of them are really like defined by each other necessarily. They're both just trying to like figure shit out, you know? And
Right.
like you were saying, in the context of the world that she's living in, almost all of these men around her are older and predatory, and she's having to like navigate a really, really tough environment. And what she finds in Gary is someone who ideally won't become like those men, right? But for now is like giving her that safer space that she feels comfortable in. And maybe it might not make sense to people outside of that relationship, but it works for her and it works for him. So
Right. And there's something there too about how so much of this is through Gary's point of view, especially at the beginning. And I think, again, another thing I would encourage people to do is just like, please like think back to your experiences and try to imagine or think of like someone who had a crush on you at a particular time. And this person, let's say they're like 15, like Gary's age, regardless of your age. And you ask them like to describe a scenario where like you, I don't know, like drove them to school or something like that. I think a lot of boys like have had that with like older girls where like PTA described it at the Q&A. He was like, I was always around like my sister's friends. Like they were always driving me around. Like I loved that. Like the boy in that case is going to like recount that story with much more like joy and maybe exaggerate it because he was a teenager. And for him at the time, it was the coolest thing in the world that a 19-year-old or whatever was driving him to school. Like it's, you have to like think about it in a way that's not so black and white, cut and dry. I don't know. I think his movies are always in the gray, and I get why that doesn't work for some people, but it really works for me.
right. And even outside of that dynamic, it really is to me just like a fun hangout movie, like I said, in the sense that like what I love about his work is that it's so unpredictable. You know, you have no idea from scene to scene where it's going to go. And I think that especially is appropriate for this film that is so much about aimlessness and trying to find direction. And it's like suddenly we're going from her wanting to be an actress to then him starting a waterbed company to then meeting John Peters and delivering a bed to Barbara Streisand's house to then her having to like navigate this truck, which is out of gas. And then suddenly she's like working on a mayoral campaign.
Yeah.
And it's like she's just trying to figure things out and find her place where she finally feels like, okay, now this is what I'm going to do. And by the end, she says she loves Gary, right? But that might be true right now, but who knows if that'll last beyond like a year or so.
Right. And Alana Haim, she says that, you know, when they filmed that and how she always envisions what happens immediately after that cut is that she falls and skins her knee and is like, Gary, really? And she doesn't talk to him for weeks. So it's,
I love that.
It's just, again, it has that breeziness to it that I love, but it's also really sad too. And I love that about it. Masterfully written. I love the tone. I love how seamlessly he moves from scene to scene. It's just, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think it was a writing achievement, which is why I was predicting it to win original screenplay. In addition to the fact that it won at BAFTA over Belfast, which I found to be I thought was a telling thing that happened. And then it didn't end up doing that. It only gets 3 nominations, but 3 very big nominations: picture, director, screenplay, which is a rare combo to only get those 3. I wish Alana had gotten in.
Oh, me too.
Would have been fun to have Bradley Cooper in, even though it would have been another sort of not wasted nomination, but like he's not winning for that. So
he's in Glenn territory.
Exactly. So I'm not going to wish that on other actors.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. I definitely would recommend people watch or rewatch Licorice Pizza. I do think it has good rewatch value too.
Yeah, I've watched it 10 times.
Oh boy, even more than Dog Power.
Yeah,
Wow.
But not as many as Phantom Thread. So
Of course, yes. Well, let's move on to Nightmare Alley. So I'm a fan of Mr. Guillermo del Toro. I think just his love for movies is just infectious. And
Yeah.
it's been cool to just see how much that love has bled over into his last few films, especially like Shape of Water definitely felt like a throwback doomed romance kind of film that I really loved. And then this is an homage to film noir. But yeah, I was very excited to finally see this. And then I have to admit that once I did see it, I was a little underwhelmed, ultimately.
Yeah.
It's obviously a gorgeous film to look at. Sumptuous production design, just incredible work with the carnival, so detailed, very lived in.
Yeah.
The way everyone is styled, it's just a delightful film to just put on in the background while you're doing other things and just look up and be like, wow, that's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
So I love all of that. I'm going to be honest to say that I watched this again as a half watch, like I said, like, you know, in the background, because it's a busy time for me right now. But
Yeah.
I watched actually the black and white version, which is on HBO Max.
Okay.
And I have to say, if there's any film that's in this lineup that should be in black and white, it is this movie. I think it looks
Interesting.
incredible in black
Okay.
and white. Even though it
Okay.
does have that shiny, glossy look to it, I think in this case, like Dan Louston, the cinematographer, really plays with light and shadow in a way that is very evocative and very much giving you that film noir edge that it when I watch it, I'm like, this looks like it was originally filmed in black and white with that intention, more so than color. So
Cool.
I would recommend that. As far as just the film itself, I sort of feel like it's two different films for me. You know, that's just the way it's structured, where we have the carnival and then we have him going off and having his fun with Cate Blanchett, who, I mean, could do this in her sleep. This kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
role is just, you know, classic femme fatale.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just was not as compelled by this as I was hoping to be. And I was frankly a little surprised that it did get nominated in the end, because it definitely lost a lot of steam. It had a lot of pre whenever it was screened hype.
Yeah.
But then I feel like it sort of dissipated and the box office was abysmal because it opened against Spider-Man for some reason. But what did you think of Nightmare Alley?
So this was the other Best Picture nominee that
I
I
mean, yeah.
forgot, which I'm sure you knew.
Yeah.
I've only seen this one once. It didn't really leave a lasting impression on me as a film that I had to rewatch. It feels a little cold to me. In a similar way to Dune, I suppose, in that it feels so much more concerned with the technical components and the world building, which I love. I think Tamara Deverell's production design, I think she should have won. What she
Yes.
does with Lilith, the Cate Blanchett character's office, is so beautiful. I just love Art Deco as well, and just constructing that carnival. I'm a big Bradley Cooper fan, but his performance in this to me was like watching a block of wood. I just was like not I
Wow.
was not on his wavelength for this. It was completely different from what I saw in Licorice Pizza, which was my favorite Bradley Cooper performance besides A Star Is Born. Yeah, so it didn't really leave a lasting impression on me, even though I think it's well made. I will check out the black and white version
Yeah.
per your
Yeah.
recommendation, because I haven't rewatched.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's available on streaming at least. I know it was on the physical release too, but
Yeah.
yeah, like I like that we have options there. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, a great final scene for Bradley. You
Yes,
have to admit,
definitely. I will admit
ends
that
the film
for
strong.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a tougher watch, I would
Yeah.
say, just because of how bleak it is all around. Really, it doesn't really leave you in a good place. But in a strange way, even though I wasn't as thrilled with the movie as a whole, I was kind of happy in the end that it did get in to this lineup, because
Yeah.
I know it meant that more people would be compelled to see it. And I want films like this in general to exist. Like I was saying with King Richard, mid-budget adult drama. Yeah. So I was happier for this than maybe what some of the alternatives could have been in the Best Picture lineup.
Me too.
Specifically referencing Being the Ricardos.
Oh my God. I forgot all about Being the Ricardos until
got a
just
PGA
now.
nomination. Yep.
Oof. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So-
agree. And I even like Crimson Peak, honestly. Like, I can
Yes.
watch that one. So I would
Definitely.
recommend it to anyone just for the visual experience alone.
Yes, agreed. Miles McHale said, did Bradley Cooper really deserve a snub over Javier Bardem and J.K. Simmons? Speaking of Being the Ricardos there.
I mean, I would have, he wouldn't be my pick to replace Bardem. I actually
Right.
would have gone with Hidetoshi Nishijima from Drive My Car, but
Yes.
he's still better than Bardem for sure. And he would be my pick to replace J.K. Simmons. I think he should have gotten at least one acting nomination.
Yeah, I wouldn't have nominated him for Nightmare Alley, but definitely would have taken it over Bardem. And definitely over J.K. Simmons, no question. That's a waste of a nomination.
Complete. Yeah.
Yep. And then Miles McHale also said, was Cate Blanchett on autopilot in her 2 movies?
Yes, I think so. I think especially here, I mean, her role here is to just look like a beautiful femme fatale, which is how I envision Cate Blanchett. Like, that's just the way that I envision her at all times. And similarly for Don't Look Up, I would say autopilot as well. That character had no place in the movie. Really, like the whole subplot with the affair with Leo was so ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
I was just like, please, can we not do this? So if I had to pick a Cate nomination, though, I would have gone with Nightmare Alley.
Definitely. I think she was having a lot of fun in both of these movies. And she did get that SAG nomination for Nightmare Alley, so she may have come close for an Oscar nomination. I think maybe she just makes it look too easy, and that's why it feels like autopilot. I don't
That
know if
could
I
be.
would fully go to the sense that like she's phoning it in necessarily, but she's a very talented actress, so I don't think these are the biggest stretches for her, I suppose you could say.
I'm so excited to see her in the Todd Field film this
Yes.
year. Like,
Todd
that feels
Field is
so,
back.
Yes, I'm so ready for whatever weirdness comes
Me
with
too.
that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's move on to our final Best Picture nominee.
Still going.
Yep, West Side Story. Yeah. So this was sort of branded as a remake of a Best Picture winner, even though that's not actually the truth, Ellen. That's so West Side Story is an adaptation of the stage show, not a remake of the Best Picture winner. So yeah, Steven Spielberg directing, Tony Kushner adapting, the Dream Team from Lincoln. Most people should know West Side Story. I don't feel like I need to go into a whole thing about it, but yeah, I really loved this adaptation, actually. I thought it was exceptionally well staged. Maybe the dancing, the choreography wasn't quite on the level of what Jerome Robbins did in 61, but I remember seeing this in the theater and being almost overwhelmed in a positive way, just from like the first few sequences of feeling like, once again, these kinds of movies that feel like they're disappearing more and more, like it's such a lovely throwback in a way. And obviously Spielberg is like the guy that you go to for this kind of earnest, nostalgic type of vibe, and I think he just matches that earnestness of the material also really well. The Ansel Elgort is a little inert on the whole here. Not the best part of this film necessarily. I don't think he's like so egregiously awful that it takes me out of the movie necessarily, but clearly the weak link. Rachel Zegler is, I think, an incredible find. Ariana DeBose, I'm so excited to see where her career goes from here after this well-deserved Oscar. Yeah, very much commanding the screen. Mike Feist becoming like the definitive riff here.
Yeah.
And down to, Rita Moreno coming back in another role. Yeah, part of me wishes that if we did have like a legend in the supporting actress lineup, that it was her rather than Judi Dench. But yeah, I think This actually made me want to see more musicals from Spielberg, even if they're like these kinds of adaptations of older classic musicals. I just think he sort of knows more than a lot of people in Hollywood that are still working today, just how to honor the past, basically, and just appreciate what makes those kinds of movies and musicals so timeless in a way, but then also adapting it to a new era and sort of maybe ironing out some of the dated aspects. So yeah, I mean, I was very glad that he got the directing nomination. I know that was sort of tenuous for a while, kind of an up and down road for this movie. Box office wasn't all there, but yeah, super positive on this one. Definitely a top 5 from this lineup.
I agree. When I first saw this, I went into it with fairly low expectations because I do really love the 61 version. Yeah. So I didn't know what to make of it. And then when I left the movie, I was like, wow, I was an idiot for doubting Steven Spielberg. He is, I think, a very athletic filmmaker. And, you know, thinking of how well he captures war, like in Saving Private Ryan, how well he captures movement. He was so well suited to make this musical. And I loved it. I think it's one of the few films of the bunch that just felt like a movie. It was like, this has to be seen in theaters. And honestly, for me, even more so than Dune, I was like, you need to see this on the big screen and get the sound and see the choreography and hear these voices. I was really impressed by it. And I think it, for me now, is like the definitive West Side Story. I feel like the updates that they made were really smart. I loved that the Rita Moreno character, the way that they used her and how she sang Somewhere. Mike Feist, who grew up 15 minutes away from me, Ohio hero Mike Feist, is the riff, right? He's so good in this movie. I wish he got a supporting actor nomination. He was actually my standout in the movie. But yeah, I agree with you on the performances, everything about it. I thought it was just beautiful. And the way that someone probably asked a question about this, but the way that it didn't get more nominations, it was like, come on. I thought this was going to be the challenger to The Power of the Dog, but I was wrong.
I thought that was possible, but feels like maybe the box office underwhelming. People weirdly held that against the film for some reason. And the fact that there were still people being like, well, this shouldn't be made. This is like, you know, we've already done this. It's already won Best Picture or whatever. Right. But yeah, it stands on its own.
They're hard on remakes, or what they consider to be remakes.
Exactly. CODA is a remake.
It is. Almost shot for shot.
This is from César Award winner Baby Annette.
Love Baby Annette.
Yes. With Ariana DeBose being the first woman in a Spielberg film to win an acting Oscar, which other women do you think should have as well in Spielberg's career?
I mean, my number one here is Whoopi Goldberg for The Color Purple. I feel like that's the answer.
Yeah. The definitive answer, I would say. And was robbed of a win, for sure. Apologies to Geraldine Page. But keeping it with The Color Purple, I think Margaret Avery should have won. Although it would be nice to also just have Oprah win, if not Margaret. Either way, they're both better than Angelica Houston. Sorry.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Sally Field in Lincoln wouldn't get my vote there, but she's a close second for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there were options. Another one from our favorite César Award-winning baby. Rank the combo same character winners, please. Brando and De Niro for The Godfathers, Ledger and Phoenix for The Jokers, Moreno and DeBose for The Anitas.
Okay, so based on strength of both performances, I'm going Brando and De Niro first. The Godfathers, then I'm going Rita and Ariana second, and then I'm going Ledger, Phoenix third.
I have that same ranking. I totally agree. I think most of these performances are fantastic, legendary. I mean, with Ledger and Phoenix in last, I think Ledger is an all-timer. Phoenix, I think, is good, but a little mannered at times, I would say. So that's the only reason why that would be last.
Right. I'm the same way. In Phoenix, too, it's like I have to think of the competition, and he just
Right.
is not my winner that year.
Right. So, Gregory O'Neill said, "Why was Mike Feist overlooked for supporting actor?" I think he was just too unknown, maybe. I don't know. If the film
Yeah.
was a bigger hit, maybe I could have seen him making it. Kudos to BAFTA for nominating him.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I think he's too unknown. And sometimes, I mean, supporting actor and actress, they do go for unknowns, but there were so many this year, like with Troy Kotzer and Cody Smith-McPhee somewhat like leading the pack.
Right.
I feel like West Side Story's underperformance too just didn't do him any favors.
Right. James Eggs McRoy said, "Why couldn't West Side Story crack screenplay or editing?"
If you know the answer, tell me.
I have no idea. I wish I could say.
Yeah.
I think musicals maybe struggle sometimes with screenplay. That might be held against it. Editing, I have no idea to this day. I wish I knew.
Yeah. Editing makes no sense. The great Michael Kahn, like missing, it
Yeah.
just, when I saw that happen at Ace, I was like, okay, we're in trouble here.
Yeah.
This makes no sense.
Yes. Moving on to some other questions. Jeffrey Kerr said, "Had it not been for the global pandemic, which caused movies like Dune, King Richard, No Time to Die, and West Side Story to delay their release dates to this year, how different do you think that slate of Oscar nominees winners from 2020 would have looked like?" I mean, I think pretty much all these films would have gotten all of the same nominations, honestly, last year. Possibly even wins too. Like
Yeah.
maybe Anthony Hopkins still wins over Will Smith, possibly. But otherwise, I think 2020 had so many like indies in that race that would have gotten way less nominations than if we had these bigger movies. So
I totally agree. And I feel like, I don't know if this is unpopular, but I prefer the 2020 lineup.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I prefer it too.
But yeah, I think these would have been just, they would have taken over.
Yeah. Let's see what else we've got. We're obviously running very long, so we can't get to every question.
It's okay.
Thank you for sending so many, everybody. How about this? Amanda BW said, "Which of the 4 acting winners is most likely to get nominated for another Oscar again first?" Personally, I think this is very obvious.
Yeah, I agree. Jessica
Jessica.
Chastain. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could
Will
happen
Smith
this year.
has been banned for 10 years, so
Right.
there's that. Troy Kotzer, hopefully he gets more opportunities after this. Ariana DeBose, not sure where she's going after this. So Jessica Chastain is the only one who's really doing like prestige stuff. And Scott Kernan and Corey Zimmerman both asked, if this were a year of 5, what do you think we would have gotten in the Best Picture lineup?
So I'm going to say something controversial. If we're thinking of stage, like nomination stage, I don't think CODA would have been nominated for Best Picture.
Wow,
Like,
bold claim.
I don't think it makes it in unless you're voting a couple weeks later. I feel like it's The Power of the Dog, Belfast, Dune, King Richard, and then I would say either Don't Look Up or Licorice Pizza over CODA.
Interesting. I have a different lineup that I
Okay.
think would have happened. I think the 3 we would have gotten for sure are Power of the Dog, Belfast, and Dune. Mm-hmm. That just makes the most sense to me. From there, I do think it's a bit of a struggle. I personally have West Side Story getting in there, even though
Oh
it
my
did.
God, I forgot about West Side Story
Yeah.
when I was listing mine.
I just feel like it got 7 nominations. It got director. It got an acting win. I think it would have gotten in.
Yeah.
I think maybe we would have been expecting things like Licorice Pizza or King Richard or Don't Look Up to get that other slot. But in my beautiful mind that I'm creating right now, I do think possibly that CODA does still make it
Okay.
as kind of like a Juno sort of thing
Okay.
that just like breaks through because
Yeah.
of passion, indie passion, that sort of thing. I'm not positive on that. I just feel like I don't know if King Richard gets like top 5 types of votes personally.
Yeah. mean, that's fair. Okay, let me just switch mine quickly because I'm going to put West Side Story in. So for me, it's Power of the Dog, Belfast, Dune, West Side Story, King Richard.
Okay.
I'm still going to leave CODA out because I just like didn't see it at the time. I'm
That's
going to be true to myself then.
True to your heart. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's go quickly to our should have been a contender segment. We don't have to get too much into these. If anything, we can just list some of our favorites here, give a few sentences about them. We are running long. But Sophia, what was your number one film for you that you felt like should have gotten that Best Picture nomination? Whether it was actually realistically going to, who knows? But what was your fave that wasn't from those 10 that we talked about?
Hands down, The Worst Person in the World. I really wish that this somehow found a way in alongside Drive My Car. I just really connected with this story. I thought it was really beautiful, and Anders Danielsen Lee's performance, Renata Reinsve's performance, it stuck with me. I was sobbing like a baby at the 9:30 a.m. Cannes screening I went to. So, yeah.
You went to Cannes. That's true.
Did, yeah. And he, Anders Danielsen Lee just gives this beautiful monologue near the end that just like really hit me.
Yes.
That I still think of. Yeah. Oh, so I would say that one if I had to pick one.
Yeah. Agreed. So happy that it did also break into original screenplay. That was the most inspired nomination.
Definitely.
Of the above the line categories, at least. So, yeah, definitely spoke to me quite a bit as a millennial trying to find my place in the world.
Yeah.
I would also like to highlight a few documentaries that I feel like documentaries never really get the recognition they deserve for Best Picture. I think Summer of Soul was a phenomenal piece of film that should be watched and studied and preserved, about the Harlem Cultural Festival that took place at the same time as Woodstock, but the footage just wasn't seen until now. Just an incredible concert documentary on top of just what it means historically, I think was, a very deserving documentary feature winner for me. And Flea is the other one that is actually kind of sort of defies labels, and how it managed to get into documentary and international and animated feature. Just such a harrowing story. But in the end, how it ends in such a simple and beautiful way. I really wish that on top of those specialty categories that it could break into the top one.
I love that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just
Any
a few
others
more
for
I'll
you?
rattle off quickly that never had a chance. The Green Knight. I loved The Green Knight. Thought it was so well made. And I recommend that to anyone. And my other two that were never going to happen are Annette, which I talk about all the time. I love Baby Annette. And it's just this weird movie. And Bergman Island. I love Mia Hansen-Løve. I think this is just a stunning autobiographical film. Vicky Krieps, Mia Wasikowska, wonderful in it. And I would also do The Souvenir Part 2. I love Joanna Hogg's follow-up to The Souvenir. So those are just some other recommendations I would have that in a perfect world would have been recognized.
Definitely. I will also throw in Titan.
Oh, yeah.
The Palme d'Or winner, which was a very fun journey to see the journey of that film and how it was chosen by France to submit, but wasn't shortlisted. Excellent body horror, very inventive. No way it was ever making any Oscar lineup, although it deserved it for makeup, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that. I mean, Come On is something I really connected with. I love Mike Mills films. We love uncle-nephew representation. And then the other one that made my top 10 was actually Petite Maman. Beautiful Celine Sciamma film. Very simple story about a child reconnecting with her mother. I don't want to delve too much into specifics, but it's very short and sweet. Less than 90 minutes. But yeah, I really felt that very deeply, actually. I've been experiencing quite a bit of loss in my family over the past few years, and the idea of just reconnecting with them in the way that film plays out, I was very emotional watching that film. So yeah, those were parts of my top 10. Totally agree on Green Knight. Passing, Ruth Negga was robbed.
Oh, yeah. Ugh.
Oh my God. I really liked Mass. Lots of great performances there. 9 Days I also liked. There was a lot of really interesting, inventive indie films that were sadly passed over that may have gotten in 2020 if we didn't have a lot of bigger movies like this in the race.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, I think so. Let's get to the remaining questions that we have. We're not going to get to all of them, but just a handful that I found interesting.
Okay.
Oscar H. just said, what was number 11 for Best Picture?
For me, it was Tick, Tick, Boom.
Agreed. Which was also a PGA nominee. Did very well with Precursors. I don't know if I see being the Ricardos, but...
Yeah. Or The Lost Daughter, maybe, with the Jessie
Tragedy
Buckley
of Macbeth.
surprise.
Yeah.
I wish the Tragedy of Macbeth did better.
Yeah. It most certainly was not Spider-Man No Way Home.
No.
So let's dispel those rumors. Here's one from Christoph. You could choose one person, presenter or winner, who is on the stage for ceremony to slap. Who would it be?
I can't believe we're actually doing this one.
We are.
My answer is Kenneth Branagh. Sir Kenneth Branagh.
He broke Emma Thompson's heart.
Yeah, he broke her heart. And after seeing her in that wonderful movie that's not going to get Oscar attention because it's ineligible, good luck to you, Leo Grande, she deserves the world, not
She does.
that man.
Exactly. I think I would slap Kelly Slater.
Oh, that's a good one too. I forgot about all the sports presenters.
Who is a known anti-vaxxer, if I wanted to make a political statement.
That's good. Yeah, because I was thinking I would slap Van Morrison, but he wasn't there. So.
No, he was not.
Yeah.
Moving on. Brett said, worst screenplay wins ever?
So, on our most recent episode of Oscar Wilde, we talked about All About Eve, and that year, All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard won, and just it makes you think, like, wow, we had it good at the Oscars.
Yep.
Some years. I think these wins are really bad. Worst ever, I don't know, but definitely worst pair in recent memory.
I think it's rare for me to want to rank the screenplay winners last in their lineups, which is what I do here. Mm-hmm. One really bad year that I can think of is 1944, where we had Wilson and Going My Way. What are we even doing there?
No. Absolutely
not. So that's one that I could think of. But yeah, this is not a great combo overall.
No.
So Owen Daly and Maddie Moorhead said, which of the Best Actress nominees films do you think was closest to a picture nom?
I think I would say Olivia Colman and The Lost Daughter, just because of the type of movie that tends to crack in.
Yeah.
It would be closer to The Lost Daughter. Tammy Faye does have that makeup win, but I don't think that's coming close to picture.
No.
And I just
Neither is
am
Spencer.
morally opposed to saying being the Ricardos.
Well, I think it was being the Ricardos.
There you go. You can say it.
Okay. I'll own it. Cody Derricks said, who do you think was number 6 in each acting race?
I think Bradley Cooper for Nightmare Alley. I'm just saying this also because it's me. Bradley Cooper for Nightmare Alley and Bradley Cooper for Licorice Pizza. I think that Licorice Pizza, definitely, I feel like he was number 6. Actor, yeah, I'll just say him. Actress, that one is harder, but I'm just going to say Alana Haim. Because I really wanted her to get in when she got that BAFTA nomination, but it's probably Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
And supporting actress, I think Katrina Balfe from Belfast. That just feels like category confusion to me.
Yep. I would say definitely Gaga and Balfe. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was Jared Leto.
No.
So I'll say Bradley Cooper in supporting. Mm-hmm. Actor is tough. I was predicting Leonardo DiCaprio, so I'm tempted to say that. Mm-hmm. Maybe Peter Dinklage, but I don't know.
Oh my God, Cyrano. That was a movie that came out last year.
Technically nominated for costumes.
Yep, you're right.
Moving on. Here's a super fun one. Owen Daly said, if the Academy were to ask previous Best Director winners to present each of these films, who could you choose for each of these films based on the similarity of directing winner to 2021 picture nominees?
Yeah.
Great question.
So this is a great question. I love this question. And I interpreted it sort of differently per nominee, I guess.
Okay. Yeah.
So for Belfast, I selected Tom Hooper. I think that Tom Hooper has a filmography that is all over the place, and he has a win he doesn't deserve. So, Tom Hooper.
Fair enough. How about
Belfast.
this? I'll say a film and we can each say our person.
Okay.
We'll do it that way. For me, I just went the very lazy route and I said Alfonso Cuarón.
Yep. Makes sense.
Personal black and white story about childhood. Which he won for. So that was just my very no thoughts, head empty pick for Belfast.
Yeah.
Let's do CODA. Who do you have?
For CODA, I have Robert Benton, who won for Kramer versus Kramer.
Nice.
And the reason I have him is because he beat my favorite technical juggernaut, All That Jazz.
Fair enough. He beat two technical juggernauts.
Yes, true.
Apocalypse Now, too.
Yep.
This one, I decided to do Robert Redford. Because, not necessarily because of directing style, but because it happened at Sundance.
Ah, I like that. Okay.
So I felt like that would be very fitting for Robert Redford to present the big Sundance favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, he directed a family drama. I don't know. I'm stretching.
No, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Don't Look Up.
So for Don't Look Up, I was just looking through the list of movies and I was like, what has not aged well on this list? And I said Rain Man. So I picked Barry Levinson.
Okay. Interesting strategy.
Yeah.
For me, I went with Oliver Stone,
He was on my list for this too.
the political
Yeah.
satirist. Yes. Adam McKay wants to be Oliver Stone.
Sure does.
Drive My Car.
So I picked Chloe Zhao here because I love just the tone that she establishes, the warmth. There's a serious sadness to her films, like thinking of Nomadland. But I feel like she and Hamaguchi are similar in the way that they tell their stories.
Yeah, agreed. She was also my pick. I couldn't really think of anyone else who really matched the style of Drive My Car. So, yeah. Dune.
I picked James Cameron because I just thought, like, you know, a movie that sort of brought back the box office in a way, big, like, technical player. So, yeah,
I went with Peter Jackson,
that makes sense.
who obviously is adapting difficult material thought to be maybe unadaptable and also doing it in multiple parts. Makes sense.
Yeah.
King Richard.
For King
That's
Richard.
what I struggled with.
Yeah, I did too. So my answer is sort of weird, but I picked Kevin Costner because when I think of sports movies, I think of Kevin Costner.
That's fair. Yes. I went with Ron Howard
Okay.
because he also felt to me like very all-American feeling, straight down the middle types of films.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Makes
He did
sense.
Rush.
Yeah.
Licorice Pizza. Definitely curious what your pick is here.
So this is also just my interpretation because I wanted to pick like maybe someone who wasn't alive anymore, but I knew that wouldn't work. So I picked Martin Scorsese. And the reason I did this is because it's just, I can just hear him on the stage just looking at PTA going, no one appreciates you now, but one day you'll get one. Just like I did.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
I would have loved that. Well, I went with Warren Beatty for
Oh.
Licorice Pizza because not necessarily style-wise, but someone who very much exemplifies early 70s to me.
Yeah.
Like-
I thought of him too because of Shampoo, like I mentioned.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
Oh, Warren could be good. Yeah.
Yeah. Nightmare Alley.
I was really lazy with this one because I really didn't
Okay.
know who to pick. So I actually just said Alfonso Cuarón here because he and Guillermo del Toro are such good friends. And when I saw Roma at New York Film Festival, Guillermo introduced it and talked about like how he collaborates with Alfonso a lot and shows him early cuts of his films and that kind of thing.
That makes sense. Well, for this one, I actually went with Martin Scorsese because it has a connection, I feel, with classic film. And also, he wrote a big op-ed in the Los Angeles Times praising Nightmare Alley. So I felt like that would be the one he would do.
Yeah.
The Power of the Dog.
I feel like this one was easy for me. I went with Ang Lee, not just the Brokeback Mountain connection, but I feel like the ways that they tell their stories are so beautiful and emotional and often in nature. So I felt like he would be a good pick here.
I went with that at first, but I decided to try to do something more outside the box.
Yeah.
I ultimately settled on the Coen brothers here.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because I felt like they also play around with certain genres, and they've done westerns before, and they just felt spiritually like, you know, they have like their quirks to them like Jane Campion has. So I felt like, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. I feel like Frances McDormand and Jane Campion would be friends. Like I can just see
God.
them together.
Why haven't they collaborated?
Right? We need that.
Yes. And finally, West Side Story.
So for this one, I actually just picked Spielberg presenting his own movie because I thought it would be funny if he just went up there and he was like, look, I can do it. You doubted that I could do it because I've won for these other movies and I can make a musical. So I thought that would be funny. I mean, Damien Chazelle was my other option for a musical, but I think Spielberg outdoes him a little bit here.
That's fair. I mean, if we're doing that, then Guillermo del Toro can introduce his own movie
Yeah.
too. But yeah, I went very lazy here and just said Damien Chazelle because he directed a musical, and I think he's the only person who won Best Director who's alive who directed a musical here that won. So easy.
Yeah. I like that question. That was fun.
Yeah, very fun. Let's conclude here with Sebastian Grunbach, who said, what was the worst part of this year's ceremony? And what could the Oscar producers learn from the much more cohesive Grammys and Tonys?
Oh, I mean, the worst things that happened, there are so many. If I had to pick a few, the In Memoriam was really tough. It just felt disrespectful. The Godfather tribute was ridiculous. That was just not a tribute to one of the greatest Best Picture winners of all time. I mean, it had footage from part 2 and part 3 in it. Just in the music it was playing over it. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, like, and not to, you know, we don't have to go into this. I'm happy we haven't yet, but everything surrounding the slap, it taking attention away from Questlove and all the winners that night, like that was hard.
Yeah. Hard to find a lot of positives, I would say, from this
sure.
particular ceremony.
For sure.
I will just say the thing that certainly rankled a lot of us awards people, which is that they did not present 8 categories live.
Yep.
I found that incredibly disrespectful to the craft of filmmaking, which is what we should be honoring here. And the fact that they just sort of bowed to ABC by insisting to do a 3-hour ceremony was just ridiculous to me.
It was awful.
I think the biggest thing they can learn is something that should be obvious, but apparently isn't to these Oscar producers or the network, which is to just have respect for what it is we're all doing here. Like, we're supposed to be honoring movies and the craft of movie making, and it's just really embarrassing to me that they keep chasing this audience of apparently very cynical people who don't actually care about movies and are talking down to them as if, like, we're all on your side, average viewer. We also think The Power of the Dog was boring, and who gives a shit who wins Best Original Score? Like, let's bring in Shaun White and Kelly Slater and Tony Hawk. Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think too, it's so sad to see how embarrassed of the Oscars they seem to be. Because the thing about the Grammys and the Tonys, like the questions, right? The Grammys, they had musicians, managers, and like people who worked for them who nobody knew present. And it didn't matter. people didn't stop watching the Grammys because people they were unfamiliar with were presenters. And the Tonys, like, you felt at every point of that show that the people in that room cared about theater, and the people putting on that show cared about it too. And that's the kind of show they put forward, and that's missing from the Oscars. It makes me really sad to see, like, Wanda Sykes going to the Academy Museum and acting like it's stupid. Like, a lot of young film fans would love to go to LA and go to the Oscars Museum, the Academy Museum. They would love to be able to do that. And there's just no reference for it anymore. The Oscars just feel meaningless when they treat them that way. It's just sad.
Yeah. There's just a lack of respect for legacy. And we only really saw like a glimpse of it, I would say, with Lady Gaga and Liza Minnelli at the end. Like, I want more of that.
Yeah.
I want them to blend the past and the present. And I want them to bring the honorary awards back
Yes.
to the ceremony. Cut out the pointless bits that no one even likes anyway. Just let it be like a big blowout event. Like, we only get this one time a year. Why are we trying to cut it down? I think the people in charge of Grammys and Tonys actually understand what the audience wants, and they have respect for the crafts that they're honoring.
Yeah.
What a concept.
What a concept. And they're not tied to ABC, Disney.
Yes, that's a big part of it
Yeah,
too.
it's really, really sad. And, you know, Lady Gaga, she expressed interest in hosting.
Yep.
They can plan ahead and get her
Which
to
they
host.
should.
They shouldn't be waiting until 2 weeks before the ceremony to be like, here are our presenters.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just, it's like pulling from a hat just 3 random people. Amy Schumer, Regina Hall, Wanda Sykes. Sure.
Like, okay.
Well, here we are. We're at the final segment. This
my
is
God.
so long, but let's get into it. This is a very obvious question for you, the most obvious question of the night. CODA wins Best Picture. Power of the Dog is the runner-up. Did The Power of the Dog actually deserve Best Picture over CODA? Sophia Ciminello, what is your verdict?
My verdict is absolutely 100% yes. The Power of the Dog deserved Best Picture. It is such a towering technical achievement with wonderful performances all around, and it's made by someone who, I mean, I will follow Jane Campion's work for the rest of my life. I can't wait to see what she makes next, and I love the statement that she made with this film, and I can't wait for it to be taught in classrooms all across the world and for other people to discover this film. And at the end of the day, you know, I got into the Oscars because the Oscars were actually how I discovered new films. And where did I start? With the Best Picture winners. And that right there, it's like theoretically, like the best movie of the year should win Best Picture. And the best movie of the year to me that I hope future audiences, future generations find is The Power of the Dog.
Amen. I totally agree. No surprise there.
Yeah.
I think CODA is a very lovely film that really, I'm going to say, even though the nature of this conversation might not suggest this, I think got a lot of undeserved hate this season, personally speaking. I think the way that people sort of dismissed it in a way felt like just because it was in this conversation, it felt like people very much piled on it, dogpiled on it in a way that wasn't really fair to the film. Because the film was not setting out to be Best Picture, you know? So
not
I
at
feel
all.
like the expectations were just a little too high once it got to that place. But having said that, Power of the Dog definitely gets my vote as well. Either way, its legacy is cemented, like we've been saying. So a win would have been nice just for history, but it will endure. It will endure. So
Yes.
that is what I have to say on that.
Thank you, Kevin. That was very dramatic.
Sophia, thank you so much for this long and winding discussion, Irishman length discussion
my God.
of this past year. Truly couldn't think of another person to talk about Power of the Dog with better. So thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. It was like very therapeutic and cathartic to like revisit the season and talk through it. And I think like finally close the book on what was a really rough season, but filled with some great films too that I plan to revisit in the future. And again, I thank you for thinking of me for this movie. And it feels like we, like summoned Bronco Henry's ghost to come back here. So yeah, it was very therapeutic.
Yes. Rest in power.
Yes.
Well, tell the people where they could find more of your wonderful stuff on the internet.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Sophia_Sim, CIM, and my podcast. We release episodes every Thursday. We have one that just came out on All About Eve and A Letter to Three Wives. We have a fun movie trade next week where I have to watch a Denis Villeneuve film and Nick has to watch a Robert Altman film, which will be very fun. But yeah, and we'll do Oscar content all year. That's called Oscar Wild. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Oscar Wild Pod. And then I have some fun interviews and things coming up on Awards Watch as well.
Yes, you certainly do.
Yeah.
Very excited for you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The podcast is at Oscar Runner Up. I'm on Instagram at AndTheRunnerUpIs. Rate, review, subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/AndTheRunnerUpIs, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. So we'll have a few more bonus episodes at the end of July, and then in August, we will be back. We'll be covering the Best Actress races of the 1950s. What better way to kick it off with than the most iconic Best Actress race in Oscar history, 1950. Cannot wait for that. But until then, thank you so much again, Sophia.
Of course. I'm so excited to hear the next decade in your Best
Yes.
Actress series and to get back into my rhythm of watching all the movies as your episodes come out.
Yes, definitely. And with that, I will bid you all adieu.